I thought I joined an amazing church. I was never a Jesus freak and in fact used to make fun of them as a kid, referring them as Bible thumpers. During college, that changed. I felt the need to form a relationship with God after the deaths of close family members. It couldn't have been better timing because I ended up at a new school and a new job where I eventually met Joanna. Joanna was an instant friend. We clicked right away. We shared a passion for music. We're studying the same major and could talk for hours about anything. Joanna and I hung out for about 6 months before I started to notice anything out of the ordinary. Basically, I would never see her on the weekends because she told me she devoted them to her church and youth group. I didn't think that was strange, but I was curious and asked her what religion she was. She told me non-denominational, then quickly changed the subject. Joanna started showing up to work less and less, and she started missing classes. She was always tired when she did show up, or looked completely drained or out of it. Rumors around school and work were that she was on drugs. I knew that was false because both of us had a disdain for drugs and others who partied hard like that. Joanna had less and less time to spend with friends, so I rarely would see her. After about 1 month like this, she called me out of the blue to go out to a Denny's. We met up and she pulled out her phone. She showed me a YouTube video of a recent volunteer activity she did with her church group. Joanna explained to me that she volunteered a lot at her church and it took a lot of her time up. The video quality was excellent for a church video and it played almost like a short film. The passion she had talking about all the good deeds they do and how fun it was piqued my interest. I asked her the name of the church. Again, she did not disclose, but said non-denominational Christian. She asked me to come with her right now because it was better that I see it myself. I found that strange because it was 10 p.m. at night on a Wednesday. I went into a small office warehouse looking building. I found it strange that a church wouldn't have any signs or any pictures of Jesus in the space. It looked like a child's daycare or learning center. Immediately women rushed over and hugged me. It was unreal. I later learned I got love bombed. Before I knew it, I was sitting in the corner of a room with a woman slightly older, and Joanna, she had a dry erase board and started teaching me about the Bible. The Bible study made sense, but soon after she asked me if I was ready to be baptized. It was now around 11:30 p.m. and I felt some sort of obligation. I had no ride home, had no idea where I was, and these happy, shiny people were cooking for me and teaching me the Bible. How could I say no? I was hesitant, but the intensity grew and I could feel the attitude start to change to desperation. They promised it would only take a few minutes and that God was watching and I may die if I deny being baptized after learning the truth. So like an idiot, I agreed and was rushed into a bathroom to get changed into a white robe. When I let them know I had changed, they ushered me into a bathtub where a small Asian man walked in. Apparently, he was the pastor. He told me not to be nervous and that the water would be warm. I kneeled in the shower with the lights dimmed while the rest of the women came in wearing veils over their head, singing in some strange monotone voices. I heard him baptize me in the name of an Asian god, and that's when I got freaked out. Once I left, I was baffled and nervous. It was such an intense feeling. I was still stuck there as Joanna had driven me way out into another country. So I had no idea how to leave. They made me more food and later told me that the name I was baptized under would later be explained to me when I returned to study more. Everyone kept telling me how I was part of the family now. I ended up returning and being pretty heavily brainwashed by this group, to the point where I felt like they were my family. I did things I'm not proud of. I helped recruit people and spent hours and days and weeks there. Eventually, I found out that Joanna was just a recruiter, which I would soon turn out to be. Someone who just forms fake friendships to bring more young women into this group. I escaped mentally and deprogrammed and disfellowshipped. It was a truly haunting experience that no young female should go through. I still see Joanna time to time with a vicious wolf pack preaching to women on campus and malls. I usually hide or run the other way. Joanna, let's not meet ever again. My run-in with a cult. Alright, this is my first time trying to tell this story. Bear with me. I live in a rural part of Kentucky. There's not much to do here for a couple of bored teenagers. You always hear about local urban legends. Every town has one or two. My town is no different. Kentucky has a cult presence. I leave these two links here so you can see for yourself. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's a distillery in a remote part of the area. It sits by the Kentucky River on a stretch of road out in the middle of nowhere. Kids in the area love to throw parties there. One of my friends, Jay, was one of these kids. Jay moved to our school in the middle of the year. He knew everyone and everyone knew him. During a dull maths lecture, Jay and I start talking about local myths surrounding the area. There are quite a few. Jay starts telling me about a distillery he used to throw parties at. He says that he's heard rumors that a cult meets there, and continues to tell me weird experiences he has had there. Everything from dolls being nailed to the walls inside the distillery, to a homeless guy shooting at him down there. I decide I wanted to check it out. Jay, a few friends and I decide to go to the distillery the following weekend and explore the area around it. Our plan was for me to drive my car and Jay to drive his car. We had a total of 8 people going with us, and for me to follow Jay there. Friday comes and the whole day at school we were getting psyched up for our trip. At about 10 that night we all meet and saddle up. I follow Jay in his car with my 4 passengers, and Jay drives his car with 2 passengers. We drove for what seemed like forever. About 45 minutes pass. I didn't even know if we were in the same town. Jay turned his car onto a little 2-lane road. This road seemed pretty normal. No sign of anything out of the ordinary. I kept following Jay's car down this road for about another 5 minutes. That's when things started getting weird. The road got smaller and we passed a street sign that just had the word Hell spray painted on it. We passed a couple houses that had a weird red lights on the inside and a few houses that looked like they were falling apart. A little bit further, we passed the distillery and took a left up another holler. This road was even crazier. It was almost straight up a mountain with no guardrail on the side. If we were to swerve off this road, we were dead. We get to the top of the hill and keep following this road until we came upon a gravel driveway. Jay stopped his car. "This is it," he said as he got out of his car and walked over to mine. I noticed some strange things right off the bat. The driveway led up to a huge house surrounded by trees. In the trees, I noticed ropes hanging from them. They looked like nooses. There were signs posted everywhere about shooting anyone who came on the property. I also noticed a weird rock formation in a clearing of trees off the side of the road. Almost like a Stonehenge type deal. After talking to Jay for a little while about the route we were taking to go back home, we noticed lights coming down the drive. A few of them. "Drive! Drive!" Jay shouted as he took off back to his car. I immediately floored it. I left Jay and his passengers in the dust. I almost hit 3 deer that jumped out in front of the car. My buddy in the back seat started asking us if we seen those things behind us. I asked him what he was talking about, and he said that there was what looked like dogs in the road behind us. He said that they looked like dogs, but were way too big to be dogs. We got back to town and stopped at a Waffle House to rehash what just happened. Jay said that he seen a few dirt bikes and ATVs coming down the drive and didn't want to be around when they got down there. Could this have been the cult everyone was talking about? I may never know. If it was, let's not meet again. Stories from inside a cult. Let me just start off by saying that I've never been an entirely normal person. I'm doing this for my sister. These are my diary entries from my time in a cult. February 10. Mum called today. Sarah's in a real pile of shiz apparently. She joined this weird religious group several months ago. At first it was just meetings and potluck dinners. Then we stopped hearing from her for days at a time, which turned into weeks. This is very unusual for my family. My mother, sister and I have always been tight, more so since my dad left 10 years ago. We haven't heard from Sarah in 3 weeks. Mum is starting to freak out hardcore. She said she's even tried calling the police, but you can't technically file a missing persons report for someone who just isn't calling. I mentioned going after her to my mum. She hates the idea. I think if I give her a few more days, she'd be a bit more open to it. The last time we heard from her, she was in Montana on a retreat for this group. They call themselves Helazine. I forced the name out of her one night at the bar, just as she first started getting involved with the group. Google tells me this has something to do with the ancient Greeks, but I don't get why Sarah would be involved with a group like that. There's not a lot I can do for now. February 12. Mum finally cracked. She gave me her blessing to head to Montana to see if I could pick up the trail. Maybe she's still at this retreat and hasn't been able to call. Either way, I'm picking up my freelance writing job and heading to Hopetown, Montana. Packing sucks. February 13. Made it to Hopetown. I rented a cheap hotel room, but it has heating and that's really all I care about. Okay, I lied. I just found a roach in my room. I care, but I can't afford anything better on a writer's salary, so I have to tough it out. I'm going to start my search for Sarah tonight. Ask around at the local restaurant about Helizade. Surely with a town this small, someone should have heard about them. So I just got back from the local diner. Food sucked, but the strangest thing happened. First off, hardly anybody would look at me, even the waitress. I had to stop to talk to the old man sitting in the booth next to me. I introduced myself, said I was looking for my sister, told him that the last anyone heard from her, she was on a retreat with Helizade in this town. He stared at me long enough to start wondering if he was English speaking, then shook his head. He got up in the middle of his meal and just left. He left all of his food and everything. It was the strangest thing I've ever encountered. I tried asking the waitress, but she literally ran off into the kitchen and refused to speak to me after that. 3 a.m. I was just awoken by a knock at my door. Given the late time, I was slow to get to the door. When I looked through the peephole, that old guy I tried talking to at the diner was standing there, looking like he was about to jump out of his own skin. When I opened the door, curiosity winning out over precaution, a blast of what smelled like whiskey hit me full in the face. The crappy blue hotel lights flickered in the hallway, making him look slightly demonic. He placed a piece of paper in my hand with an address and a time on it, not meeting my eyes, and then turned away and ran off. I have no idea what this address is for, but it obviously has something to do with Sarah. Or he's sending me to a murderer's house to be chopped into small pieces. Either way, I don't have much of a choice. Needless to say, this is a weird town. I need to find Sarah and get the hell out. Update. I woke up early this morning, February 14, and decided to try and hack Sarah's Facebook. I figure Facebook is the mecca of her social media presence, and it's not as public as Instagram or Twitter. People don't like to splash cult knowledge all over the internet, just a guess. I know my sister pretty well, but I haven't been able to get it yet. I'll keep working on it and put up what I find later today. After my date on the note I got last night, hopefully I'm not dead by then. Remember, the whole murder thing is still entirely possible. February 14 continued. Oh my god! Or should I say gods? Two major things happened. I managed to hack Sarah's Facebook. I didn't find anything alarming with the exception of one personal message. It was from a guy named Jared, a casually normal name. The account is deactivated now, or I would have messaged him myself. The message itself was just a single phrase, Ganoti Seutan. Google, always the ready scholar, tells me it means know thyself. Why Sarah would have someone named Jared messaging her such a thing, I have no clue. But it's a start. And I have a name I can use. The second event is the meeting. If you could call it that, I went. I packed pepper spray in my boot, just in case. I followed my GPS to the address the old guy gave me. It's about 20 minutes away from the hotel in the middle of nowhere. As I drove farther into the woods, the dread I felt blossomed into full-blown fear. But I kept driving, I had to keep reminding myself, I'm doing this for Sarah. I got to the location. It was an old run-down building that looked like a church. It didn't look like anyone had used it for years, given the sun was setting and the light wasn't very good. It looked like some of the windows were boarded up, and the community garden by the gravel parking lot was overrun with weeds. There weren't any other cars in the lot, and I started to feel like driving out to the middle of nowhere had been a bad idea. Of course, I had also made the idiotic decision of not letting Mum know where I was going. I hadn't wanted to worry her. Just as I was getting back into my car to leave, a van pulled up next to me in the lot. A short guy got out and walked towards my beat-up Honda. He looked normal. Brown hair, green eyes, no features that screamed serial killer. I casually reached down to grab the pepper spray and held it tight anyway. The guy approached me but didn't say a word. He just stared at me for the longest time. I started to panic, torn between spraying him in the face and running or trying to ask him where my sister was. Something in my gut kicked up, screaming at me it would not be a good idea to bring Sarah up. After what felt like forever, he started to turn away, his face expressionless. I knew I had to do something. The chance of finding Sarah slipping away from me every second I stalled. I blurted out the first thing that came into my mind, the words in that message I read from Facebook, Ganati Siotan. I hoped I pronounced it right, and without seeming terrified of speaking words whose weight I knew not, he stopped and turned to look at me. Suddenly, a warm smile broke across his face, and he seemed excited. He repeated the phrase back at me and moved to clasp my hands in his, almost as if we were shaking both hands. When he felt the pepper spray in mine, he chuckled. Tomorrow, 8 p.m. He also gave me an address. I guess I passed whatever test that was. I'm back in the hotel room now, trying not to panic over what I might have gotten myself into. I keep having to remind myself that I'm doing it for Sarah, but doubt keeps me wondering if I'm even on the right track. What if this is just another random religious group I happen to have stumbled on? In the same small town. Highly unlikely. Anyways, I'll stop rambling my fears out. I'm just nervous for tomorrow. I guess I should get some sleep. I need to be ready for anything. February 15. I am back from the 8 p.m. meeting. I am packing everything frantically and trying to write this quickly so they don't leave without me. The meeting was in some house close to town. There were a few other people there who looked like they also had no idea what was going on. We all sat in a circle and introduced ourselves. The leaders of the meeting asked us what our purpose was in seeking out those that had asked us to come here tonight. I guess I wasn't the only one who was given directions by a random person in an obscure location yesterday. The girl who went first said she was looking for something more in life for fulfillment. I was next. I decided that sincerely obscuring the truth can be the best form of lying. I introduced myself, saying that I don't really know what this was all about, but I was also looking for something to help complete my life. I lost someone a while back, someone that meant a lot to me. I needed help recovering from that loss. The whole thing felt like a AA meeting. Other than the semi-formality of the atmosphere, everyone appeared normal. The house was average, not creepy. I almost couldn't believe the weirdness of the abandoned church yesterday. After we had gone around the circle giving introductions, we were paired individually with leaders. I got paired with a girl who seemed really excited to be paired with me. boring all me, a person she didn't even know. She bubbled with enthusiasm as she asked me all about myself, what I do for a living. After I gave her my mini life story, she asked me if I had any questions. Hell yes, I did. I asked her what the group is, what they do and practice. In answer to my question, she simply said, Grace, we're the type of people who like to help others find their way in life. We believe in fulfillment through the gods, that pleasing them helps us find our path. We would love to help you find your way. I think that you would fit in well here. I told her great. I couldn't wait. What was the next step? She told me, and I kid you not, the next step is the retreat. The point of this meeting was to find people who were emotionally ready to make the leap. She said she thought I was ready. She expressed that it was important that we leave tonight in order to preserve the emotions brought out tonight and the urge to find something more. Basically, we needed to leave for this retreat before any new people could develop a sense of caution and change their minds about the whole thing. I played my part though and agreed to meet back at the house as soon as I grabbed a bag from the hotel with enough clothes to last a few days. I am only allowed to bring my phone and clothes. I'll try leaving my laptop with the front desk and ask them to ship it to my house. We'll see if it ever makes it home. I have doubts. I just called Mum to let her know everything. She went crazy when I told her about the retreat, yelling that it was a stupid idea. I agreed with her, but reminded her of Sarah and that we really don't have other options. She said to hang on. She would fly up and we could go together. I told her no, that wouldn't work. The only way I got an in on this was from some random old guy who hooked me up with these meetings. I told her that bringing an outsider with me wouldn't grant me the same access. She agreed only after I promised to call her about any weirdness happening. She assured me that if she didn't hear from me within 12 hours, she'd be calling the police again. I've been thinking of the old guy from the diner. I haven't figured him out since I last saw him. He wasn't at any of the meetings. Obviously, he has some connection with this group. These people who call themselves Helazine. I haven't let slip that I know about the name. My gut instinct was to play dumb and everything about the meeting. We'll see if that ruse works long enough to get me through this retreat. I don't know if I believe in God or the gods, but if you do, please pray for me. I will update when I can. Don't use Craigslist. Trust me when I tell you this. Don't use Craigslist. I know that may be obvious. It's not ideal. Meeting up with a stranger and giving them money and giving them your address or going to their house. About a week ago, I decided I needed a new phone. I chose to look on Craigslist. I found the perfect deal. A new iPhone 12 for only $400. What a steal. I tried to contact the person that was selling the iPhone, but he didn't respond. Well, that's weird. But I didn't think much about it. Over the next couple of days, I continued to message him, but he still didn't respond. But finally, he did. He only sent me his address, and only his address, which was weird. When I responded, he didn't say anything after that. So the next day, I decided to go to this guy's house, which was a really stupid move looking at it now. When driving down the rocky street, it seemed like nobody lived in any house on the street. But ignoring that red flag, I went to his house. Seeing the house, it was dark. The wood was old and uneven. But once again, I ignored that as well. When walking to the front door, I noticed the grass was uncut and rough. It went up to my knees. When I approached the front door, it just swung open, which startled me. "Hey, what the hell?" I said, almost falling on the rocky floor. "Do you want the phone or not?" a man said in a deep and dark voice. Yeah, I have $400 in cash. Is that what you want?" I spoke. "Yeah, that'll work," he said. I walked up and gave him the money. He snatched it from me and slammed the door in my face. I started to yell, "Hey man, what the F?" I said, angered. He didn't open the door for what seemed like hours. But when he finally did, he just stuck his arm out with the phone. After I grabbed it and thanked him, after I said, "Oh, by the way, what's your name?" He paused, then he said, John Smith." After that, I turned around and walked away. But I didn't hear him close the door. When I turned on my car, I looked at the door. I saw him. I saw him still staring at me. Creeped out, I put all my weight on the gas pedal and floored it down the street. When I got home, I was way too tired to actually set up the phone. I fell asleep once my head hit the pillow. When I woke up, I turned the phone on, but I noticed something strange, something unusual. I noticed that the phone was still signed in with the last person, probably the creepy guy that sold it to me. So feeling a little nosy and curious, I opened the phone. "What an idiot," I said, laughing. "That guy didn't even have a password. That is too easy," I thought. After opening the phone and going to the home page, I immediately went to the Photos app. After opening the app, there was nothing. There were no photos in the camera roll. Weirded out, I went to the photo albums, and that's when I found something. The photo album was titled "A Fun Night," with a winking emoji. At first I thought the pictures or videos in there would be very different, but they weren't. There were only 2 videos, both with a black thumbnail. Then I did something I regret. I played the first video. When the first video started to play, it was a black screen. The only sound I heard was soft rain. After a few seconds, the camera quickly panned up. It made me jump. It was so quick and sudden. The camera was turned to look at a car outside. The camera stayed fixed on that car for more than 30 seconds. What the hell is this? I thought to myself, confused. Then a woman actually opened the car door and got out of the car. I did not know this woman, nor have I seen her. After the camera wouldn't move away from her, a man started laughing in a maniacal tone. Then he said, "Can't wait to have a fun night with you," he said in a scratchy voice. That's when I stopped my breath. I knew that voice. That voice was the same as the man that sold me this damn phone. Thoughts began racing in my mind. Was he a murderer, I thought? Is this video a prank? After the first video ended, I went to the second one. I noticed this one was exponentially longer than the first one. While the first one was 2 minutes long, this one was 7 minutes. The same thing happened like in the first one. It started out as a blank screen with rain in the background. But the difference was, it was in an abandoned warehouse. Then around 45 seconds in, I heard soft, quiet crying. Cries of a woman. "Shut your mouth," the same man yelled. She stopped immediately. The camera panned to look at the woman. He stood the camera up against the wall of the warehouse. She was the same woman that got out of the car. I started to become lightheaded because of this. Is this a sick joke? I thought. Did he actually kidnap her? Then the man reached his arm out to caress her knee. She started to whimper like a sad dog. Then right after she started to cry, he slapped her right in the face. "Shut up," I said, in a loud and demanding tone. Once again, she stopped. The man then grabbed a knife out of his pocket and cut the rope around her mouth. She started panting and breathing really heavy. The man then said in a maniacal tone, "I want to have a little fun." In one swift motion, he pushed the woman down and brought the knife up to her chin. He moved the knife around her jawline. Blood started to leak out under her chin. Then he dropped the knife and started to choke her. She started to turn purple. Then she became lifeless. He then picked up the knife and started to carve a wide smile in her face. After he finished the smile, he grabbed the camera and showed a wide and bloody smile. He started laughing and said, "Wasn't this fun?" After seeing this, I jumped out of my bed and drove to the police station. After I gave the police the phone, they figured out the man and the woman in the videos. For legal reasons, I will just say their first names. The man's name is Dale and the woman's name was Jessie. The man was convicted of murder and is now in prison for life. The woman sadly died from blood loss. Like I said in the intro, don't use Craigslist. Creepy Craigslist roommate. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It wasn't a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29 and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell that something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I look nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all his movies. I didn't know what to make of it. It was creepy. The whole night she had been saying, "I look like him." And now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks later, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls all night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth. And then there would be this long awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again. And every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker. Max Barker. Max Barker. Seeing her standing in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it didn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator and she stumbled out of a room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was annoying. She then asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was an uneasy into the topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops. And she wasn't listening to me when I was asking her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his effing throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly, I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening, and she started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of my dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back to sleep. The next morning, when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after I moved out, she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that she had sent me over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I effing hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I never heard from her again. I always wonder if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out. I will never search for apartments on Craigslist ever again. Me and my girlfriend Kylie decided to buy an apartment together. She was looking on Craigslist and saw a really luxurious penthouse apartment for only $300 a month. It was really nice as it looked over the city. It had really nice bedding, a big bathtub, and just everyone's dream apartment. Kylie calls the man and he said he is happy to show her the apartment. And she said, "Me and my boyfriend are on our way." What's weird is that the man on the phone was like, "Oh, okay, I didn't know you was having people come with you." Alarms were already starting to go off in my head when he said that. Kylie says to me that we should just see what it looks like and just leave. I agreed and we wait outside the apartment. It was really rusty looking and all it had tall glass around it. We look at the ad and we both look at each other as we saw a greasy looking man come up to us. He had a white tank top on and tan shorts with a rusty beard and braided hair. Kylie and I were kind of looking at each other in disgust. He pointed his finger at me and he said, "You stay downstairs, young man." For me, being from Canada and being young, I have never ever witnessed something like this in my life. Now I should say Kylie is from Australia and she is pretty tough. So if this man tried anything, she would kick his ass. I waited downstairs and I heard a faint scream coming from the basement. I didn't think too much of it as I thought it was just a kid outside. Then I heard it again and I decided to call the police and told them what was going on. They came after 20 minutes and Kylie pulls me outside and she says she is not gonna get this place at all. And I told her about the screams in the basement. The man was arrested and wanted in another state, and the screaming downstairs came from a woman named Stephanie, who was also interested in the apartment, which in reality, Kylie said it was shiz house, with dirty clothes and woman's clothing, just shiz like that. I now know to never ever search for stuff on Craigslist ever again. Me and Kylie now live in a really nice rent to own home in Orange County, and all I have to say is don't always believe what you see on these Craigslist ads. You never know what kind of mastermind, sick F, lies beyond them. My girlfriend talks in her sleep. She's been saying the most horrible things recently. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. And it wasn't at a healthy level. Far from it. I would think about her every moment she was away. I would sometimes sit on my couch and just stare at my phone, waiting for her to text. I'd tell myself, don't contact her. Don't. It will come off as too strong. But then I'd still find myself clicking her name on my contact list before my inner voice would continue. You don't want her to know how desperately smitten you are with her. It's unattractive. It will scare her off. No, you must wait for her to call you this time. And it was excruciating and exhausting, almost unbearable. I once heard that the ancient Greeks believed that falling madly and irrationally in love with somebody was a curse that you would wish upon your enemies. I could never understand what they meant. After all, isn't falling head over heels in love the ultimate goal nowadays? But now that it's happened to me, I have to say, the ancient Greeks were right. This is a curse. I was barely in control of myself, almost as though my infatuation with her had possessed me. The two of us were sleeping together, but still in the dating phase. We were at that make or break era of blossoming relationship where we'd either have the talk and formally be in a relationship, or we'd start to slowly drift apart. The latter of which I don't think I'd be able to cope with. Honestly, I wouldn't be able to. Almost everything about her captivated me. The way she held her hand over her mouth when she laughed. How she'd caress the pendant of her necklace when she was frightened. How she'd twirl her hair in her finger when she was excited. All of it. Her smell, her smile, her eyes. Yeah, I know. It probably makes you sick reading about it. I feel the same way. I was never the hopeless romantic type, but now I can't stop fantasizing about her. I think about us doing the long 3-hour hike up to that magnificent view from one of our first dates, to that first kiss as we overlooked the lights of the city. But this time, I'd get down on one knee, bring out the ring, and, well, you know what would happen next. Alright, fine, I'll stop. Yes, this is a girl I'd only been casually dating for a couple of months. I shouldn't be thinking about proposing yet. I know that. I'm just barely able to control myself any longer. I feel as though I'm losing power over the decisions I make. And that brings me to why I'm here writing this out at the moment. It started with the first real thing that troubled me about her. We'd never actually spent a night together, no matter how late she was over. Once either of us showed signs of being tired, she'd up and leave. She wouldn't leave awkwardly or in anger, just a casual kiss goodnight, a smile, and a call me soon. It was something I didn't really even notice the first few times she did it. But after almost 8 weeks of dating, it was becoming strange. I'd have to ask her about it. It took drinking almost an entire bottle of wine before I had the courage to do it. She looked almost defeated when I asked and lowered her eyes in embarrassment. I knew this talk would come eventually, she started. She took in a deep breath with a long drawn out exhale. Recently, she paused again. I've started talking in my sleep. She shook her head in embarrassment. It's called samliloquy. I looked it up. I shrugged and laughed out loud. My demeanor seemed to say, "That's it?" "No, Stephen. Listen," she said. She wasn't laughing. "It's bad. It's completely out of control. It's not just random words or gibberish. No, it's horrible. I say horrible, disgusting things." She was starting to raise her voice, breathe heavy, and tear up. I approached her and held her. I told her it couldn't be that bad. I told her to spend the night. I told her she was probably exaggerating. I was wrong. The night she stayed at my house, she warned me of something before falling asleep. "Whatever you do, don't wake me up. It makes me really scared and disorientated if that happens. And don't respond to me. Just ignore it." I nodded and agreed. "If it becomes too much," she continued, "just leave the room and sleep on the couch. I won't mind." I told her not to worry about it. I told her that it wouldn't be a big deal. I told her I wouldn't leave to the couch. I'd stay beside her in the bed. But I was wrong. I couldn't even last one night. We both fell asleep without incident. I don't know how many hours passed, but I woke up in the dark with a sensation that someone was watching me. And then I remembered. She was with me. She was actually spending the night. I smiled. But then I noticed the shadowy outline of her sitting up on the bed. She was looking down at me, staring. It creeped me out, I'll admit it. Her posture was entirely different. It was as though it wasn't even her at all. Then she spoke. It wasn't her voice that I heard. It was much lower and gravelly, like something out of a horror movie. "I'll chew the skin from your bones," she said. I froze. At first, I just kept looking at her. This was not at all what I expected. I thought it would be more like the way Tourette's is often portrayed. Just random swearing and shouting. I honestly thought to myself, what will I do if she attacks me right now? What if she really does try to chew the skin from my bones? But then she just lied down and went back to sleep. I was creeped out. I tried to lie back down and ignore her but struggled. I couldn't even close my eyes without thinking, maybe she's sitting up again and staring at me. And then one time I rolled over to look at her, and she was. Her face was pressed right towards mine. Her breath was foul and rotted. Something that was most certainly not normal for her. She spoke again, in the same voice as before. "If you don't move to the couch, you'll be dead by morning." That did it for me. I sat up in a moment and headed for the living room. She made some sort of wheezing sound as I left. I think it was supposed to be laughter. I was lying on the couch, but I wasn't going to be able to fall back to sleep. I was far too shaken. I was staring out towards the window, hoping to see the first few hints of the sun rising. And then I thought I heard something from the bedroom. I listened, and then I heard it again. "Stephen!" It was that same low and gravelly voice. It sounded like a witch. I tried to just ignore it at first, but then it continued. "Stephen!" Still, I said nothing. "I know you can hear me, Stephen. You're awake now. Why don't you come back into the bedroom?" The voice barely sounded human. "Or maybe you'd prefer if I can come to you." I still didn't say anything. I was told not to, but I listened. If I heard her start walking towards the bedroom door, I'm not even joking, I would have run right out of the apartment. But she had asked me not to respond to her sleep talking, so I didn't. And then I heard her once more. "Sorry if this spoils your plans," she began laughing. "The two of you are supposed to walk that trail again," she started. I wasn't even remotely prepared for what she'd say next. "You'd both be so tired when you'd reach the top. You'd look over the city, then you'll get on one knee and bring out the ring." She began laughing, and that's when I realized this wasn't just a problem with Steve talking. It was something much more, something supernatural. I had never told anybody about my proposal fantasy. There was simply no way she could have known about any of it. This was no longer about merely talking in one's sleep. This was about possession. I can't go back into the bedroom. I have no idea what would happen if I did. Instead, I'm going to wait it out, holding up in my living room until the sun rises. I have a couple of hours left till morning. I can hear her laughing occasionally in the bedroom. It's still not her voice, still that same low pitched cackle. But as I sit on my couch routing this out, here's what scares me the most. Maybe my infatuation and utter obsession with her wasn't normal. I said before that I felt like I was losing control of myself. Most why I believe that the typical falling in love story. No, I fear that the infatuation I felt was the entity slowly taking control of me, of it controlling my thoughts, fears, ambitions, and anxieties. Maybe once I become completely absorbed, a transfer would occur and she would be free of it. I know I should leave, that I should open the front door, get in my car, and drive away from here. But I can't. I can't leave her. I've already lost control. I'm infatuated with her. Utterly infatuated. So a demon possessing someone. I've shared this story with close friends over the years, and I still completely stand by it. Simply put, when I was a kid, I very clearly had extra senses and abilities that eventually shut down shortly after witnessing this event, and which now, 20 years later, I'm starting to try to find ways to slowly reopen. This was not my first time seeing evil spirits, demons, or sensing them, but it was the first time I felt seen by one. I went to an extremely large university in the US. In my second year, a transfer student arrived and I developed a strong crush on him. We are still in contact thanks to Facebook, though nothing ever materialized between us. The following year, a master's student transferred into our department, and she and he became immediate besties. There was something super strange about this girl, something not authentic. But strange yet, she was immediately super popular. It seemed like everyone just fell in love with her, would bend over backwards for her, and as a result, she was able to get away with a lot of things. I used to witness her manipulating students and professors, situations, and I could sense that she somehow knew that I saw through her. Of course, she did everything possible to block me and prevent me any access to the guy I was crushing on. And when it seemed like he was finally showing interest in me, she swiftly got in the way of that. The odd thing is that no one else seemed to notice how shady she was. Everyone just thought she was amazing and sweet and funny, except one of my best friends, who was a few years older than either of us. She confirmed what I was picking up on, and knew something wasn't right about this girl. Well, time went by, and I got used to her presence, but this unsettling feeling I would get around and about her never went away. Sometimes so strong, I would feel really off in her presence. One clear, beautifully sunny spring day, I was walking back into campus. Our department's buildings were very close to the edge of campus where all the stores and restaurants and frat houses were. I had been coming back from lunch and walking through this wide open space between two very large buildings. Directly ahead was the quad, although ours had a specific name and shape, and just behind the large building on the right was a smaller, oddly designed building. This girl was walking from between these two buildings at an angle away from where I was, crossing my path at a diagonal and heading towards the quad. Given her direction, she could not and did not see me, but I had full view of her. She stepped out from the shadows of the two buildings into full, open sunlight, no clouds, completely indirect sunlight, with absolutely nothing nearby to cast a shadow on her. In an instant, I got a super strong and strange feeling as she was covered in a pitch black shadow. I stopped walking as I was shocked to see this, and that's the moment a horrible black creature manifested, rose up from her back, turned over her left shoulder to look at me in a serpentine fashion, and hissed at me with glaring yellow eyes and a mouth full of sharp teeth. I saw it, and it saw me. I was absolutely terrified and couldn't move. It then reabsorbed into her as quickly as it had appeared, and the dark spot that surrounded her went away, and she just continued walking along like nothing had happened.
I made it a point to
I never
ever
saw it
pick
again,
up a hitchhiker.
and after that,
I've seen too
I
many
stopped
horror thriller
hating
slasher
the
movies.
girl
Even
and just felt
have
really
the
sorry for
desire.
her.
Even if the
But I
line
would
in the
do
movie
anything
Detroit
to
Rock
keep
City
my
reminds
distance
you
from
that
her,
a lot of
and gave up
also
any
start out
hopes
like
of
that.
hooking up with
Not
that
to
guy.
mention, I still have
I then
flashes of the
continued to
Rutger
pray
horror
to
movie,
stop seeing
The
demons
Hitcher,
and evil
from my
spirits.
childhood, to remind me
It
that it's
stopped,
just not a good
but
idea.
once in a while,
Under
I
other
still will
circumstances,
get a
I have
strong
no
beam from
compunction
someone.
or hesitation about being a good
I don't know
Samaritan.
what became of her,
Most of the time, I ask my
and if
subjects
she
if they want to use their
ever
real
rid
names
herself
when telling
of
the
that
stories.
presence.
If they don't, I give
I
them
hope
the
she did.
opportunity to pick the name I'll
As
use.
anyone else
If they don't pick a
who
name,
said
as you've seen, I'll pick a name that has something to do with their musical tastes. Such was the case with Lemmy. He wasn't your average Motorhead fan. Seeing he just turned 85 this year, he may be old, but I'll bet he can drive circles around you and parallel park a fully loaded rig better than you can a Mini Cooper. Lemmy doesn't hit the road with a rig anymore, but he does drive trailers around a warehouse near his home for a living. He says he doesn't need to, but he told me it's when you stop moving that everything sizes up, everything seizes up, and that's when the Reaper gets your ass. I agree, Lemmy. I agree. I was driving for a logging company from the late 1950s until the early 1980s, anywhere from Oregon and Washington to Maine and Georgia, and even Alaska for a few seasons. I've seen some crazy shiz, from logging accidents that'd make even the most cast iron stomached zombie chuck his lunch to wrecks on the logging roads that neither Stephen Hawking nor Stephen King could explain, even if they put their melons together. Well, it was only a week or two after May 18th, 1980. If you all were alive back then, that's when Mount St. Helens erupted, blowing a huge chunk of the mountain sideways. I imagine you can find a video of it these days on that YouTube's or whatever it's called. Anyone who lived within a few hundred miles will recall how the ash fell like snow and covered every goddamn thing. We ended up covering our exhaust and intakes with old t-shirts to keep the ash from effing up our engines. It took a short while for the state of Washington to clear the roads from the deep ash fall. At the time, I was driving a logger rig down the mountains in that area, or if I were lucky, I'd get to drive the rigs from the bottom of the logging camp to the mills we contacted for. There was speculation in the campus that the logging business in the area was going to grind to a halt. But then we heard that our company had won a contract bid to clear a good portion of the blowdown trees that the eruption had destroyed in the vicinity of the mountain, and that were now clogging up Spirit Lake. at its base, so that eased our fears of impending layoffs in the meantime. I was driving along US 20 from the base camp to one of the mills outside Tacoma when I came across a figure shrouded in a parking against the rain. They were trudging through 5 inches of mud on the roadside that the icefall had turned into. I felt a bit bad for them, and since we were so close on the heels of the eruption, I still had the spirit of charity in my heart. I stopped to offer them a ride. "Where you headed, partner?" I shouted it because the rain was deafening on the roof of my truck. He looked up at me and I recoiled a bit because this fellow looked like he'd been left in the oven a bit too long. He smiled and pulled the cardboard sign out of his park. "Portland or bust," it read. "I'm headed to just outside Tacoma, so I can get you that far at least." The guy shot me a thumbs up and stowed his sign. Climbing up into my passenger seat, being careful not to shake the rain off his parka onto my relatively dry interior. He lowered his hood, and by God, he was an ugly sumbit. Every bit of skin I could see looked like he'd been charboiled. He even smelled a bit sulphurous and burnt. "For frick's sake, man, what the hell happened to you?" He held up a finger, as if to say 1 second, and dug around in his pockets. Producing a stubby pencil and a small notebook, he scribbled, "Don't know, woke up like this, sorry, can't talk." I looked at him a little bit. "What do you mean you woke up like that?" He bent to his tablet again. "Woke up in the woods by the mountain." He pointed off in the direction of Mount St. Helens. "You get right the F on out of here. You got caught in the eruption. How in the name of Satan's gnarly nutsack are you alive?" He shrugged and laughed a little. It sounded like a pair of pumice stones rubbing together in a sandpaper bag. "Did you just get out of the hospital or something?" He frowned a little and shook his head. "Well, cut my nuts and call me Susan. Actually, name's Lemmy. What do you go by, son?" The guy kind of hung his head and shook it, writing, "Don't know. I don't remember anything except I need to go to Portland." Now, I'm a fairly skeptical person, and I do tend to call people out when they're feeding me a line of bullshit, but this guy looked like he didn't have a bone of deceit in him. Well, if that doesn't rattle the bishop's tits, I don't know what I'd do if I didn't remember my name. I take that back. I've been that drunk before. The sound of more rocks tumbling together told me he was laughing. "Shiz, I'll call you quiz though. You're ugly enough to pull it off. Just ain't got the hump." He considered it and showed, giving me a thumbs up. I didn't know what else to say at that moment, so I clapped my trap and drove for a little bit before a question occurred to me. "What do you think you are doing in that area, and what do you think is waiting for you in Portland?" He looked like he was thinking real hard. He wrote, "I woke up just on the far side of the lake that the mountain sits on." He was shrugging for the name I helped. "Spirit Lake? You're kidding. You were that close?" He nodded. "That's where I woke up anyway," said the pad. We rode a long time. As far as Tacoma, I have no idea. Home, work, family. I'm hoping it's at least one of these things. I agreed that would bode well for his situation. He gave me a sheepish look then and wrote, "I haven't eaten anything substantial since I woke up. Do you mind if you stop somewhere to eat?" I must have looked at him funny because his eyes got a worried look and he quickly scribbled, "I have money." I said it was no problem, and we stopped off at the next exit that had a fast food joint. As we took off after the food stop, he seemed to doze off a bit, leaning against the passenger door. That was alright with me, and I just hammered down as much as the road conditions would let me. I heard a growling noise all of a sudden. My eyes shot over to Quasimodo, and he was out like a light. The sound was deep and grating. Imagine what the tectonic plates on a fault line might sound like 1,000 feet down if you could get a mic down there without it melting. Then he started saying something in his sleep. At least I think he was talking. Though it didn't sound like any language I knew. It sounded like a mix of German, Hungarian, and someone rubbing two big rocks together. I didn't like it at all, especially when a bit of smoke or steam, whatever it was, drifted from between his lips. "Hey, Cosimado, wake up!" He jerked awake with the start, his eyes meeting mine with a trace of concern as he scrambled for his notebook. "What's wrong?" he wrote in all capitals. "I don't know if you were snoring or talking in sleep, but you just had some bizarre ass sound coming out of your face hole. I thought you couldn't speak." He looked puzzled and wrote, "I can't, well, at least not without sounding like I drank acid or something." He opened his mouth, and a noise like a broken conveyor belt issued from his throat. I held up my hand. "Gotcha, gotcha. Just don't do that again." He gave me a thumbs up as we pulled in Tacoma. He slipped a thank you note, wrapped into a $20 bill, into the visor above his head. I tried to tell him it wasn't necessary and reached out to grab his shoulder as he turned to get out of the truck. The second I touched him, there was a sizzling sound, and I drew my hand back and watched as a red welt rolled on my palm. I looked at Quasimodo again, saw steam rise off his shoulders as the rain hit him. His eyes almost looked like they were luminescent red, just in the white store. He smiled and chuckled. That sound like breaking rocks again, and waved goodbye as he turned and walked away through the truck stop parking area. This was the last time as a long runner, and it was the last time I ever picked up a hitchhiker. You can bet your sweat ass on that. There's always been a quiet debate amongst drivers whether they are long haul truckers, traveling salesmen, charter bus drivers, and the like, or just people who travel a lot, as to what region of this country has the weirdest shiz happen on their roads, or just off them in some cases, by the occurrence super or extra natural in a region, ghost, phantasms, serial killers, wendigos, or just plain run-of-the-mill psychopathic, sociopathic douche canoes that have nothing better to do with their lives other than F with other people. Sadly, the latter is far too prevalent. But I digress. You came here for a story, not a soliloquy. Feel free, however, to catch up at the bottom. I will apologize in advance as this is not a trucker story, but a story told to me by a friend who drove a bus route for over 15 years. I hope you enjoy. Marcus just retired at the ripe young age of 46 from a certain company whose slogan might have asked its patrons to leave the driving to us. With a distinguished 28 years, he started as a ticket clerk and eventually got his Class B license and became a driver. He retired as a regional administrator for the southeastern US. It's in this area the story takes place. I was doing my loop route at the time, from New Orleans to Atlanta, Atlanta to Nashville and Memphis, then Memphis back down to New Orleans, stopping at all points in between. Now, you may know that New Orleans has a culture steeped in the occult, and is a large service industry and tourism town to boot. So when I say I get all kinds on my bus, you better believe it. On this particular run, I had everything from nuns, students and soldiers to party burnouts, retirees and people transitioning to new places for new lives. I was raised a good Catholic boy, so I made sure that sisters had good seats for certain. I apologize for my professional treatment, but growing up in an orphanage, these women were basically my mums. And who doesn't treat their mama right? Marcus is indeed a very religious man and doesn't swear. He endearingly refers to them by their first initials and won't even come close to uttering a "God damn it," which is sacrilege for him, so I'll be supplying the colour translation to his commentary of the events that took place. So I have the sisters up front along with a young lady they tell me is travelling with them to the Mercy Convent just outside Savannah, Georgia, where she is to begin training buses in Atlanta. When I asked the young lady if she was excited to serve the Lord, she shied away and I got a stern admonishment from the highest ranking sister there. "Sir Vanessa has taken a vow of silence until her ceremony of commitment. Please refrain from speaking to her as she may be tempted to break that vow." Vanessa hung her head a bit and I felt immediately guilty, but that's all a part of being Catholic. I thanked the sister for her guidance and suggested they settle in since it was a 14-hour trip from New Orleans to Atlanta. There were several stops in town and on the outskirts of town before we hit the open road, so everyone was still talkative and lively around 10 p.m. when we crossed over to Mississippi on I-55 northbound. You folks might not know why riding on a bus cross country is so affordable, so I'll briefly explain. Most bus services hit just about any little old town that's not too terribly far off any given route, thus turning what by car might be a 4-5 hour drive into a 14-20 hour odyssey by bus. Mainly because instead of traveling directly on the major highways, many routes follow parallel to them of rural routes and country roads, depending. I've done it several times myself, and it's a great way to meet interesting people for sure. Sorry again for interrupting. We're about halfway to Jackson when the disturbances began. People were complaining of a faint smell of rotten eggs or of flies on the bus. I could only assure them that this bus, according to the maintenance logs, which I willingly displayed for them along stops, was cleaned 2 hours prior to their coming on board. I'm a bit of a stickler for cleanliness and made sure my bus was one of it, and if not the cleanest in the fleet. One of our internal mottos is take pride in your ride, and I most certainly did. There was a bit of a drive after our last pickup and our first major stop in Jackson, so people had time to settle in and fall asleep, including the sisters escorting young Vanessa. She was humming a tune I wasn't familiar with and gently rocking back and forth. I could see this is in a small parabolic mirror I have on the dash to give a view of the passenger cabin, so I could keep an eye out for anyone pulling shenanigans. The distortion of the curved surface of the mirror made her eyes look bigger than they were, and her head mishappen. It was an unnerving effect. I was about to pick up the mic to quietly announce our immediate arrival into the city of Jackson when something in my mirror caught my eye and gave me a pause. Vanessa had turned around in her seat and was staring at something towards the back of the bus. I couldn't turn my head that far to look, and still keep my eyes safely on the road at the same time, so I kept a watchful eye in snippets. She seemed to be pointing at someone, and then beckoning them to her, but as far as I could tell, in the darkened bus, everyone back there was asleep. I politely turned my head and said, "Miss, please, turn around and be seated. We'll be entering the city shortly." I think I saw her make a face at me in the mirror, but I'm not sure. I picked up the mic and announced 5 minutes until Jackson arrival. In Jackson, the couple sitting behind the nuns and Vanessa approached me as I was assisting a porter with the loading and unloading of baggage. "Sir, could you maybe make an announcement to the bus before we leave in regards to trash and food or something? Someone in our area has a rotten ham salad sandwich or something and it's making my wife nauseous. It'll be greatly appreciated." I told them I'd make an announcement of sorts, and in the meantime, if they wanted to rebound the bus at this time, there may be open seats in a section away from the source of the smell. I went to the terminal manager and asked if he could have someone from sanitation personnel take a walk through the bus to ascertain the source. With no passengers on the bus, it was an easy sweep that came up negative. There were no foul orders. If anything, the sanitation clerk complained that the New Orleans crew had used their fresh scent spray a bit too liberally. I announced boarding and the couple were the first on the bus, making a beeline for the rear of the bus. It was about 2 a.m. when we finally departed the terminal and people were beat and tired. The bus fell almost immediately to silence, with the exception of the elder sister who snored like a lumberyard. Nobody stirred except for Vanessa. Call it the vibrance of youth or nervous energy over starting a new life. She was wide awake. Looking around the cabin, I knew from when I came back on board and the safety lights were still on that there were no passengers in the last 2 rows, but she kept staring back there. She would occasionally giggle and resumed humming. At one point, I heard a low murmur, too deep to be Vanessa, was coming from her vicinity. The noise ceased at once as one of the nuns stirred and asked Vanessa if she needed to use the restroom. They made their way back, and as far as I can tell, the nun went in with her. This was odd to me, but I'm not 100% on how they operate. They were in there for a good 3-5 minutes. As far as I can reckon, I have to keep my eyes on the road if I want to keep my safe driver bonus. So, admittedly, time got away from me when the door opened. I could barely tell what was going on back there, but it appeared that the nun pointed to the from the bus, and Vanessa returned to her seat next to the sleeping elder. She looked like she was finally settling in. The nun that went into the bathroom did not come back up from, but seemed to have disappeared into the one of the two empty rows. Nobody voluntarily sits next to the bathroom unless they want privacy or are up to no good, but this was a nun, so I opted to believe in the former. I noticed that Vanessa had lain her head down on the shoulder of the elder nun and appeared to be fast asleep. I caught a whiff of a rotten egg-like smell, and that murmuring from before started again. This time I still couldn't make out words, but it sounded like a chant of sorts, deep and foreboding. I remember seeing a sign reading Granada 1 mile. We didn't have a stop here, but it's where I pick up RR8 to head over towards Tupelo, birthplace of Elvis Aaron Presley, the king himself. Marcus cleared his throat and sat up a bit straighter in his seat. When we hit the town limit of Granada, all hell, both literally and figuratively, broke loose. With a jolt, the elder nun sat up with the most ungodly scream, like her insides had been lit afire. She started tearing at her clothes and saying things no woman, let alone a nun, should utter. Dear God, forgive the W. I've lain with men. I've tasted the flesh of sea and sea alike. I played with my N during Mass. I licked Sister Marie's on a dare when I was 23. I don't think I want to read this. I stole my parents from my parents and burned their shed to the ground. Dear God, please forgive this filthy. I thought I was going to wreck the bus. Here's this nun, a woman of God, tearing off her clothes and exposing herself and confessing her every sin to the world. I was terrified. Next thing I knew, she lurched forwards, grabbed the door lever and wrenched it open with inhuman strength. She threw herself from the bus in a swan dive at 55 miles per hour. I swerved to the left, as I didn't want to run the poor woman under the tires, and stood on the brakes. I sat there for a moment, my hands shaking in their death grip on the wheel. I looked out into the darkness. The confused muttering of the other passengers, and laughing. I looked for the source of the laughter. I found it in the maniacally grinning face of Vanessa. I'm ashamed to say I was not the first person out of the bus to check on the nun. One of the young soldiers aboard was a combat medic. He rushed to assess the damage. I didn't manage to get on my radio and contact the authorities in a bus. I stepped out of the bus and approached the still naked form of the elder nun. The soldier had rolled her over to perform first aid, but we could tell it was too late for her. She landed in such a way that the vast majority of her face and breast had been scraped away by her impact with the road surface. Her palms and forearms were free of abrasion. She hadn't even attempted to stop her dive towards death. The police took statements and took photos. When I explained that the nun had been sitting next to the young girl, the police were unable to find her. Vanessa had slipped away in the confusion. We found the other nun in the rear of the bus, huddled in the darkness, her eyes and tongue missing. An autopsy later revealed the missing organs in her own stomach. She had torn them out and swallowed them. The only trace of Vanessa were bare, bloody footprints leading from the bus steps to the woods on the side of the road. Two things are certain from that night. They never found that girl, and I believe in my God even more now.
Bad things come in threes, they say. I think it's true. Last month I had put my dog down. A week later, my boyfriend suddenly broke up with me. We had been together for almost 4 years, and he was even talking about getting married. Then when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I got fired from work. I shut myself in my room. I didn't go out for 2 weeks. The only thing that gave me the strength to get back up again was my art collection. It was the only thing that accompanied me through the difficult times. Soon, I managed to find a new job, albeit it was located very far from my home. It was a 30-minute bus drive and then a 20-minute walk to my apartment. That was pretty much the only downside.
It's scary walking home alone at night, probably even more so for women. I often worked overtime, and by the time I got off the bus, it would be around 9 p.m. 20 or so more minutes of walking meant that I would be get home near 9:30 p.m. In December, when it got dark by 5 p.m., it was pretty dangerous. I always walked as fast as I could and held my keys between my knuckles. The other hand was always in my coat pocket, ready to grab the pepper spray. For a couple of weeks, nothing ever happened. Last night, however, was different. I worked later than usual, so by the time I got off the bus, it was almost 10:30 p.m. I shivered and scrunched up my shoulders. It was minus 15 degrees, and I couldn't wait to get home and snuggle underneath my covers. My face was starting to itch. It always got worse in cold weather. I probably needed to buy some new lotion. Lost in thought, it wasn't until 10 minutes later when I finally noticed the extra sound of shoes crunching on snow behind me. Someone was following me. I walked faster. The footsteps quickened. I gripped my keys tightly and looked back. It was a man, about 6 feet tall. Most of his face was obscured by the shadows, but I saw a brief flash of white teeth. "Hey baby, where are you going?" he called out to me. I turned around and started running. I knew he was following me and couldn't let him follow me home. Gasping for breath, I blindly turned into a smaller side street. The street lights started flickering violently, matching the rhythm of my heartbeat. Shiz. It was a dead end. I was trapped. I turned around and faced him. The street lights stopped flickering and stayed on. As he walked closer to me, I saw his face more clearly. He was a handsome-looking man, around mid to late 20s. His blue eyes sparkled, and he gazed at me hungrily. His hair shone a dark copper under the streetlight. I slowly put the keys in my pocket and tightened my grip on the pepper spray. He was almost in front of me now. I took a step back, and his lips twisted into a devilish grin. He lunged at me, and at the same time, I whipped out this pepper spray. Clack! He knocked it out of my hand and grasped my shoulders. "Why are you in such a hurry, my love?" he hissed in my ear. I shoved him backwards, and he staggered back a few steps. Startled by my strength, he eyed me warily. His eyes widened as I caressed my own cheek. I felt the skin below my ear and tugged, gently pulling the mask off my face. The 22-year-old woman's skin was so soft and tight as I delicately folded it up and put it in my purse. He stared at me in disbelief. "What? You're a man? How?" His voice trailed off when he saw the knife. He screamed and tried to run, but tripped and fell heavily onto the snow. As I made my way towards him, I rejoiced at the new addition to my art collection. Before I start the story of what happened to me while I was walking my dog tonight, I want to give a little background of myself and where I live. Okay, so I live in the city, not a big city by any means, but a city nonetheless. And if you have ever lived in the city, you'll know that things work a little different here than small towns like the one I grew up in. Luckily for me, the place where I live is pretty tame. At least, that was what I thought. You see, I've been living here for 2.5 years, and I haven't really had any problems with the place. aside from the occasional weirdo catcalling me, or the drunks coming out of the bars on Friday or Saturday nights. Not much happens too often around here, even though I technically live in the shadier part of town. I still haven't seen or heard much. Maybe that has something to do with the fact that I have a rather large dog, Windsor, that goes particularly everywhere with me. He's really a big teddy bear, but people are afraid of him because of his size. So long story short, whatever the hell happened tonight was definitely a first. It's been warm and beautiful out lately, so I've been trying to make up for our winter of staying inside by taking Windsor out on long walks every day. However, today was especially hot, and since Windsor is pushing 9 years old and has a heavy black coat, I didn't think that he would do very well in the heat today. So I decided to take him out after sunset. Big freaking mistake. The walk actually started out quite nice. I had my headphones in, the sun was still setting over the hills, and the streets were nicely illuminated. Nothing was out of the ordinary for the majority of the walk, until we decided to head home. Instead of doing my normal loop down through the park and back up along the main street, I decided to do a shortcut and make my way past the museum that's near my apartment. This museum is quite large and has paths all around it as well as streetlights, and I've never had a problem here before. Although perhaps I just never noticed anything before. You see, I took my headphones out halfway through my walk so I could hear my surroundings better, and I'm really glad I did, because I probably wouldn't be alive right now if I didn't. I was rounding the corner of the museum where there are rows of trees on either side, and as soon as I rounded the corner, I had this strange feeling of being watched. Typical, I know, but it's true nonetheless. I stopped for a second and looked around me, but shrugged to myself when I didn't see anything. I did take note of how dark it was behind the trees, though, as well as the faint sound of a crackling twig in the darkness, and picked up my pace just so I could get the hell out of there. There was probably nothing more than a squirrel or a raccoon back there, I thought to myself, but it was still better to be safe than sorry. That was when Windsor stopped. Usually Windsor might stop if someone is nearby. More often than not, he just wants to be petted by passerbys. But there was no one around, and when I pulled on his leash, he didn't budge. I looked down at him. I could see the fur on the back of his neck standing up and his lips curling up to show his teeth as he stared into the trees at nothing. "Come on, bud," I said uneasily, swallowing hard as I tried to convince myself that he had just stopped to spot a squirrel or a cat in the trees. But I didn't believe myself. Deep down, and he wasn't budging. That was when I saw them, a pair of large yellow eyes, standing probably 8 feet off the ground, staring at me from the darkness. I was completely frozen in fear, and felt almost mesmerized by the gaze of those eyes. I know it sounds weird, but I almost felt compelled to go closer. When Windsor started growling, however, I snapped out of it. Windsor still wouldn't budge when I pulled on him, and I wasn't just about to drop his leash and leave him behind. As I stood there, struggling to get my dog to come, I particularly pissed my pants at the sound of screeching coming from the trees as well as this strange sound. It wasn't human or any animal I've ever heard. It sounded almost like laughter, menacing and cold. I've got goosebumps now just thinking about it. I don't know if it was from sheer adrenaline or what, but in the heat of the moment, I managed to pick up my 100-pound dog and run at effing breakneck speeds toward my apartment. And I didn't stop until I was back on the main strip, where I plopped Windsor down on the grass and nearly kneeled over as I was doubled over, panting like I had just run a marathon. Windsor started wagging his tail and licking my face as though nothing had ever happened. I quickly made it back to my apartment, where I locked the door and went straight to my room without saying a word to my roommates so I could post this here. I'm hoping that someone here can give me some input or whatever the hell just happened to me or what that thing was. So yeah, I'm not going out at night by myself anymore. So I live in Sweden, really cold place, rainy and chill. I'm home alone very often because my sisters are out with friends and my parents work. I remember this night very clearly because I still shiz my pants when I think about it. My parents were working in the night shift and my sisters were staying over at a friend's house. So I'm alone with my little cat. And he's very protective. So I laid in my room watching a movie. My TV is right next to the door, so I can see the hallway. When I see someone pass the effing door, like a shadow or something. Right then, my cat started to hiss and shiz. I freaking jumped out my bed and took my fancy sword with me. Yes, I'm a very geeky girl, and slowly walked out of my room. I don't know why, but the lights were turned off in the living room and the doors were closed to all the other rooms. So I hear someone breathing right next to me. So I freaking swing my sword and hit nothing. I hear a small laughter and my cat ran the F away and hid. I yelled at whatever was there to come forward and stop effing around. Silence for a few minutes, then I feel a cold breath on my neck and a very silent whisper. You really want that? This happened 15 years ago. I haven't told my parents about it, and I don't think I ever will. I grew up in a very small town in Wisconsin. Being the weird kid, I never had many or any friends. I was a young atheist in a Catholic school, and I was always fascinated by the dark side of humanity. Of course, in predominantly Catholic town, it was very difficult for me to gain the approval of others around me. Scary movies and Stephen King kept me company for most of my childhood. However, I did find ways to entertain myself other than the confines of my own home. This town was one of those places that is often described as somewhere you can raise your kids, and no one ever locked their doors, whether they were home or not. A town that only stretched 1 square mile and had a population that peaked at 3,000. Everyone knew everyone's business and on a first name basis. Sometimes during the years of 8 to 11, late at night after my parents were long asleep, I would grab a Halloween wig and disguise myself so that I could walk around town alone. My mother had given me my grandmother's dagger because I thought it was so cool. It was a sheath with a clip on it, and I thought it was totally awesome. So I always took that, just in case. In my ignorant, childlike mind, I thought that no one would possibly ever recognize me, that I would be safe from harm, until the last night that I would ever walk the streets at night on my own. It was a warm summer night and I started down my street towards the river, wearing my wig with my baggiest clothes and my dagger in the waistband. Overly confident, ready for my adventure, I was never easily spooked and I knew every possible route and every nook in the town. I cut through the playground of my Catholic school and turned down the road towards a library. By now, I was only a few blocks from my house, but it seemed really far to me at 11, especially at night with no one around. I crossed the street towards the river, and as I looked to each side, I caught a shadowy figure out of the corner of my eye. Almost too afraid to look, but stupid enough to not run, I turned around and saw nothing was there. Just as I thought, freaking myself out, I kept going towards the river, which was at the bottom of a steep hill, but I was now getting uneasy. As I ran down the hill, heading to go under the bridge, I swore that I could hear the sound of feet on the pavement, not far behind me. Now I was really getting freaked. I got to the bottom of the hill and quickly turned around. I saw the top of someone's head as they were ducking down behind the pillar on top of the bridge. I didn't know what to do. I froze there in my steps, heart pounding, eyes welling up. I reached to my waistband where I always carry the dagger. It wasn't there anymore, but I knew that I had grabbed it. I dropped it along the way somewhere. My blood froze and I was shaking beyond control. I thought I could hear the sound of heavy breathing above me. I decided now it was time to run. Someone was definitely watching me, without a doubt. I ran up the hill and back across the street towards the playground. As I ran through, I dared not look back, but I could sense this presence was not far behind me. The breathing was getting heavier, and there were sounds of shoes hitting the pavement between my own footfalls. As I turned the corner to my street, I couldn't help but look back. Just as I looked, the figure was moving behind the building that I was now in front of. I backed up against the wall in such a massive terror, I thought I was going to pass out. I waited for 1 minute, 2 minutes, maybe 5. I really don't know how long. All I heard was silence. I couldn't stand just sitting and waiting, so I made a break for my house. I was only a block away, but it seemed like I was running the entire length of the town. I busted through the front door of my porch and stopped dead in front of the house door. At eye level, the dagger was clipped on the welcome sign in its shield. With tears in my eyes, I quietly but frantically checked every room where my family was sleeping and shut off all the lights. The doors definitely got locked that night, and I sat upright on the couch in the darkness, staring out the window, jolting at every noise inside the house. I didn't sleep for a week. I never went out alone at night again, and I still have the dagger somewhere to this day. I live in a sad tourist hotspot called Death's Door by the locals. Growing up, you start to become desensitized by the weird things that happen here. But I'll get to that later. The county that I live in recently was featured as the best vacation spot in 2019 for some magazine I don't remember that my boss told me. It's true, my hometown gets as many as 2 million visitors that its sad population of 1,000 something barely covers the minimum amount of workers needed to maintain its popularity. As a kid, I had a job to do before I even could process it. But that's just how it works. We maintain this lifestyle until we become the old people who retire and decide to succumb to God's siren call that is death in this shitty wasteland. Don't get me wrong, this place is pretty great if you can drink and enjoy your 500th sunset in a row. But for bored high schoolers like me, it gets old pretty quick, especially when everyone leaves in the fall and you are left with nothing to do and no one to talk to. That leads me to the start of my story. Being a kid in high school is hard, especially when you're the only girl in a set of triplets. I'll spare you the details, But I decided to stray away from my usual cleaning of hotel rooms for my aunt and look for a different job to get away from my life. That's what led me to my current job, an outdoor staff at my local bike store. I had seen commercials of the place at the local outdoor theatre, and it was only 5 minutes walk from my house. 3 minutes for the walk down my driveway. I had met the owners at a job fair in my school, and after an interview was hired. Many weird things have happened at the shop, but for the sake of the story, I'll only explain some of the things in the woods. My job consisted of setting people up on the right size bikes, connecting burly carts, and attaching these dumb things called tagalongs that are a pain in the ass to use. I usually had two other outdoor staff with me, and we liked to hide away in the bike garage and goof off. Now, being a relatively small young girl going into my sophomore year in high school, it really didn't seem like I would be a good fit for the job. But I loved it. I had always been an active kid, and being around my brothers my whole life gave me an advantage when conversing with my mostly male co-workers. One co-worker is particular that I was close to. I'll name him E. Had recently got accepted to a college my cousins went to, so we would talk to each other about that and other things. I had met E during school, the play and sports, but never really talked to him. Just a friendly hello or occasional question. Now, the thing to remember about E is that he is more than a foot taller than me. He's a 6'8", kind of skinny kid with a messy head of blonde hair to top it off. I once walked into the garage when the lights were off and almost shit myself when I saw him in the door frame. Despite his stature though, this kid can run. I sometimes work at a woodyard in the park after work, and he ran there to say hi. It was almost 4 freaking miles in and less than half an hour after his shift. Our athletic abilities and need for competition is, I guess, what led to the bet. He had biked the whole bike route in 35 minutes. Most of our customers take around an hour in a half or 2 hours to finish the trails, considering that it's a 10-mile loop. My need to be the best took over, and I spent the whole summer trying to beat his record. Long story short, it was a tie, but it did lead to my eventual love of biking. The trails that we advertise to bikers are usually a type of crushed limestone and run either along the side of a cliff near a road or by the shore. I usually take some back roads before entering the park, but the weird things always happen in or around the park. When I would bike in the summer, it was always small things. A black squirrel almost running into your bike, a chewed up snake in the path, deer with weird marks on their body. The most unsettling would be the vanishing footprints. When it would rain, the trails would become mush, and you would be able to make indents and footprints easily. Sometimes after a big rainstorm, you could see these random footprints that would start out of nowhere and end the same way. I tried to convince myself that they probably just got caught in the rain and that's why they just start, but it doesn't explain why they end suddenly or why I saw them at the beginning of the loop when for sure I didn't see them when I entered. Most of the time, I didn't think anything about it because there were always people nearby. In the summer, the trails were never empty. That was until the fall came and all shiz went loose. At first it was the cats. On the side roads by the park one day biking, I could see a lump on the side with flies swarming around it. Roadkill wasn't unusual, but the huge chunk of the cat missing was. It looked like something huge must have taken a bite of it, but it wasn't clean. Most animal bites have some level of cleanliness due to coyotes or whatever predators having sharp teeth. But no, this thing or whatever it was seemed to have a hard time chewing through. You could see multiple bite marks, like it kept biting down till it came off. As unsettling as that was already, I wish I could say that was the last time I saw them. Out of all the weird things biking through, the smiling people are what made me quit. They come in different forms, I've noticed. My first time was a tourist looking for direction in the woods, but by far the scariest encounter was by the graveyard. It was around early October when it had just started to get dark around 5 o'clock. I had wanted to get in one last bike ride before it would be crowded again for Halloween, and because it was my last day of work for the season. As tribute to the bike shop, I was going to bike the trails again. Even E had come back from college for the weekend to celebrate the end of the season. My normal trail brought me back by the local graveyard. I usually took this route because it was faster and because it had a hill going up and I liked to challenge myself with. I was never really bothered by the graveyard as both my grandparents and other relatives were buried there. Even some of E's relatives were buried there, as he had once told me he goes to visit them on his runs. It was getting darker, so I had decided to turn on my backlight, but it was still light enough that I could see vague figures and shapes. Most people like to put these solar-powered little lights by their family graves, and I was looking through the rows to see if I could spot the one I had put by my grandma. I was still on the road looking over when, around 50 feet away, I could see a tall, skinny figure standing at the end of the row, staring into the tree line. From where I was, it kind of looked like E. I mean, the height was about right, maybe a little bit taller. But where else could it be? I knew most of the locals, and none of them looked like that. So I just kind of assumed maybe he was here to visit a gravesite. Mistake number one. Hey E, what are you doing here? I thought you had to go back. Mistake number two. It was like something clicked in my mind as I said those words. I was broken out of some sort of trance, or whatever those effers are. For some reason, they always seem familiar. It's like they want you to talk to them, acknowledge them, invite them. I didn't even realize how ridiculous I was being until it was too late. Why the F would he be out here this late in the first place? He sometimes visits his relatives, but why wouldn't he come with family? Especially if it was a big enough deal that he had to stay back from returning to college. Where was his car? I knew personally that he hated to run at night. It was like I was numb to all the warning signs until I had opened my mouth. Then it all came rushing back with a new sense of fear. I had always been the one to not get scared easily. I would smile at the jump scares in horror movies, but the amount of sheer panic I felt as that thing turned around could kill a man. If my mind was fuzzy before, it had now become hyper-focused at what was happening before me. It still haunts me to this day from what I could make out in the dark. It had an exaggerated grin, stretching so wide it looked painful. Its mouth looked almost fake, like one of those photos dentists show their clients on pamphlets. But instead of a mouth full of healthy teeth, its teeth were yellow and rotting. Its eyes were glassed over, grey, like the kind that only appear when a body has been dead for a while. You could see them reflecting in the light of my bike light, but they never blinked. They stared straight forward at me. I don't know how to describe these things. Sometimes they look like normal people, but once you talk to them, it's like they lose the facade. You start to notice the flaws in their disguise. I started to notice that whatever was in front of me was definitely not human. Hey E! At this point, I was so scared, I didn't even think about running away. Whatever this thing is just copied what I had said. It didn't even say it in its own way. It copied my voice. I could smell the stench of its breath as it repeated that phrase over and over, like it was mocking me. Its breath was so horrid, it caused tears to form in my eyes. I could taste the bile at the back of my throat, but I forced it down and kept staring back, afraid of what would happen if I looked away. Its breath smelled like death. Even from a distance, I could smell the putrid stench of rotten meat. I can still taste the metallic aftertaste it left in my mouth. Nonetheless, I stared it down. It felt as though I was trapped in place, petrified with fear. Finally, it stopped yelling. Instead, it took a step towards me. In that single step, it moved around 10 feet. I think it moving broke some kind of spell in me, because in an instant I started pedaling away as fast as I could. I think my survival instincts took over as I peeled my gaze to the trail and pedaled away. But I was still far away from the park and roads, and more than a mile away from the main road. The hill on the way out of the cemetery didn't help. Once I got to the top, I finally turned around and still pedaling to see if he was following me. I shiz you not, I turned around and this thing is effing sprinting at me. I could see his arm moving back and forth as it moved at an impossible pace. If I hadn't been on a bike, I would have been caught by then. I don't want to think about what would have happened then. Seeing this thing sprint at me made me go into overdrive. I don't ever think I have biked that fast in my life. Just as I went down the hill that led to the park road, I saw a car headed for me. I didn't have time to react, as my bosses pulled by and shoved me in the car. At this point, I didn't even care that my bike was still in the middle of the road. As we turned around and booked it, through the window I could see the thing standing at the top of the hill I had came down, still smiling. On the drive back, I didn't even care how my bosses knew to come get me, or what that thing was. They told me that they would get my bike for me in the morning, and that I should never bike alone again. And when my bike was parked in front of my house the next day, I didn't question it. Sometimes I feel like it's better to not know. I am still recovering from the whole ordeal, but one thing is for sure. Do not go biking alone at night. Sometimes, if you're lucky or not, and you happen to have a passport since 9/11, you may be tasked with delivering cargo into Canada or Mexico. Canada is the obvious choice for most folks, but sometimes you don't get to choose. Carlos is a driver I knew for a number of years, both on the truck and off. Guess who his favorite guitarist is? His grandparents were still in Guadalajara, Mexico, and his folks had come to the USA, legally no less, and settled in El Paso, Texas, about 3 years before he was born. Carlos hauled freight for a small, privately owned company based in Corpus Christi, a fleet of about 10 trucks that specialized in what he called private freight, which probably meant either government or very rich clientele. 90% of the time, Carlos never saw a detailed bill of lading. He just got the basic and most essential info, like weight and whether or not it was hazardous material load. Carlos said most of his hauls rarely left Texas or the surrounding states. But on one particular run, he was required to drive the load all the way up to South Dakota, and he was sharing this ride with another gentleman that was there for his safety. This hombre was the type that don't say much. Basically said, pretend I'm not here. I thought it was the kind of rude to be like, hey, I'm gonna be in this truck with you for about 1,300 miles, but don't try to talk to me. Carlos took a swing of his Destrett's Brewery Obsidian Stout. For a man of little other taste, he's a remarkable beer snob, which is one of the many reasons we got along. So we hit the road, and every time we hit a dot stop or scale, this pendejo, who's going all at the paperwork, tells me to stay put. He walks in, and less than a minute later, without a word, he's back in the truck and we're rolling again. Carla said the first day went off without any problems or missteps. His quiet and, in my opinion, a bit menacing from the description passenger kept to himself until Carlos mentioned stopping for the night. As he pulled into a truck stop just outside Colorado Springs, Cluero pulled out a piece of paper and handed it to me. He said, after fueling, go to this address. Turn off your phone and all GPS devices. That was it. I followed the directions to a joint about 9 miles off I-25 and was ushered into a big metal storage facility, like a hangar or something. They had me drop the trailer and park my rig out in a dirt lot. Kulo man stayed with the trailer and I went to suck out in my sleeper. I grabbed him another beer out of my fridge and along with whiskey for me. I sat back down and Carlos continued. So the next morning, tall, dark and Feo wakes me up with a knock on the side of my sleeper. Let's go, he says. I get up and get dressed. Go take a piss and bring the rig back into the hangar. This is where shiz gets weird. There's another trailer next to mine. I can't tell if he's nervous or pissed as he continues. These effing putos tell me there's been damage to your trailer. We will repair and or replace it before you make your return trip. There's a tarp over part of my trailer and what looks like fluid of a sort on the back floor of the hangar. I was only allowed to get out of the truck to go to a quick glance at my new trailer. Freaking thing was brand new. Beautiful, man. I barely thought about what might have damaged my trailer, but in the back of my cabasa, I'm thinking, what the F am I hauling, man? I forgot to mention at the beginning the weight of the cargo. For a little explanation, I'll try to be as brief as possible so I can get back to the story. Now, a regular rig with a sleeper weighs from 17,000 to 22,000 pounds, depending on certain variables, and an average regular trailer weighs about 10,000 pounds empty. When he began his trip, Carlos said his total weight was 55,000 pounds, and he was rolling easy. Any trucker worth his salt knows when there's a difference in weight just by the way it pulls. This shingon was heavy as a mother flipper, brother. I started to drive it out of the hangar and it was putting a little strain on my rig. It's like if you've been swinging an aluminium bat for years and someone suddenly hands you a wooden bat with a lead core. I stopped and hopped out, thinking maybe these fixties had attached the air hoses wrong and the brakes weren't disengaging properly. They looked right, but I grabbed the hoses and repositioned them anyway. I was about to walk back and check the brakes visually, and the pinch puto hops out and gets in my freaking face. Carlos, get back in the truck now, I tell him. Look, Vato, I'm not going effing anyplace until I know this trailer is safe to roll. I knocked on the side of the trailer to illustrate my irritation, and that effort was solid, like steel plating instead of aluminium. And then the trailer effing rocked, like there was something inside that moved on its own, brother. What the F was that? Pinky, no mames cabron. I backed away from the trailer and Ugly pulled out a effing pistol, man. He's real shifty all of a sudden and he says, Carlos, please, get back in the truck and let's get rolling. Dude looks scared, so I'm not playing it. I get in the truck and we roll the F out. He tells me to follow the directions, and as soon as we're back on the highway, I can turn my phone and GPS back on. He still looked nervous as he pulled out his phone and began texting someone at light speed, and he kept looking in his rear mirror view. I don't know who he was talking to or what he said, but all the way stations we passed from there on out were closed, which is super crazy. When we got through Cheyenne, Wyoming, we hopped off I-25 onto US 85 and then took the US 18 split at Mule Creek Junction and took that into southwestern South Dakota. After that, he told me to take SR 87 north, and I lose track of all the little roads we turned on. I had my phone and GPS shut down again, so I'm thoroughly effing lost, man. We were bumping down some hard packed dirt road when the trailer lurched to the left. I don't mean sway or drift, that effing thing. The tires came off the ground, moved about 3 feet to the left, and thud, came back to the earth, man. We're talking maximum punka. Factor, brother. My asshole damn near tore a chunk out my seat. Carlos got his own effing beer because I couldn't move. Reviated like a kid hearing a story from Grandpa and trying to remember to scribble notes. Sadolf Lookhead next to me screams like some goddamn puta that just got her cherry poked. Stop laughing, bro. He pulls out his phone and starts yelling into it. I'm too busy trying keep the rig on the road to pay attention to him. By now I'm probably screaming like a little bitch while this armored trailer is hopping around like whatever is in there really wants out. Great chicados. Dude told me to stop the truck and I said, Pendejo, who's rolling in the only thing keeping the truck upright, he said. Kind of pale and got quiet as we bounced along now at a blistering 25 miles per hour. He perked up as in the distance we could see black dots in the horizon heading our way. I shiz you not, brother. Effing helicopters. Black Hawks, I think. Anyway, these choppers came up and landed about a half mile ahead of us. I slowed until I got about 100 yards out and I stopped. King Kong or whatever the F was in that trailer was not happy about the noise. I thought for sure the thing was gonna tip. I never got to find out. I felt a sharp pain in my neck and it was lights out, papi. I wake up in my sleeper at a truck stop outside Cheyenne. I had my old trailer back, good as new, and 3 messages on my phone when I turned it on. 2 from mi madre and 1 from the jefe, telling me to get my culo back to El Paso to pick up a load by Friday. I checked my GPS and it was blank, man. Not reset, blank. They wrecked my shiz. I was kind of pissed until I checked my banco. Whoever they were, they bought my silence more or less. Carla smiled and handed me another beer. I was an over-the-road truck driver for 3.5 years. I could say that I don't miss the 11-hour days if you're running strictly under DOT guidelines. Dragging a 53-foot trailer from one side of the country to the other. But I don't miss being out on the open road for sometimes 6 weeks at a stretch, crashing at the shittiest looking truck stops out in the middle of nowhere, eating the most unhealthy food imaginable. But I do. The things I don't miss are the creepy things I encountered in my travels. In this country, according to the Department of Transportation, there are 3,980,817 miles of roads in the United States, 2,605,331 miles paved, and 1,375,486 miles unpaved. With that much road, there are plenty out of the way places for hooky shit to go down. Truck stops are places to rest, refuel and exchange stories. But mostly you will only hear the stories that will make you laugh or the occasional grievance against the establishment. I use the word occasional with sarcasm because there's nothing truckers love to do more than beat about all the rules and regulations that keep them from making a decent living. The stories you hardly ever hear are the ones that most guys won't tell you unless they have in the bag or they know you really well. When it comes to these stories, truckers are fairly guarded bunch. You know the drill. Names changed to protect all parties involved and all that. I knew a driver named Hank. I'll call him that because this man loved his Hank Williams Jr. When he told me this story, he was in his late 60s and had about 3 million miles under his belt. You only get those kind of miles if you've been driving most of your life. Hank, along with his love for outlaw country, happened to have a deep, abiding love for getting side jobs that allowed him making a living without the man dipping into his pockets too deeply. Hank was an owner-operator, meaning he owned his own truck and ran his own business out of said truck. A beautifully restored and modified 1969 Peterbilt 359 conventional. Hank knew the old school way of running with 2 sets of logbooks, analog, to play around with the hours and miles restrictions put in place by the DOT for yours and our safety. He knew all the back routes that by DOT standards were barely legal for a truck this size to negotiate. It was on one of these so-called side runs where Hank said he saw something. Well, let me get to that. Hank said he was running one such job between Three Forks, Montana and Twin Falls, Idaho, in the dead of winter. At that time of year, the route he was taking, US 287, could be hit or miss on it. It was properly plowed. But for the money he was getting paid for this haul, he was willing to risk it. The route at times runs along the western edge of the Shoshone National Forest and West Yellowstone National Park, with winding mountain passes and spectacular views if you drive it during the day. Even in the winter, Hank said on this run, the road had been plowed within the last 6 hours, which was doable, but barely optimal conditions, with drifts of snow on the sides of the road from the plows, sometimes reaching heights upwards of 15 to 17 feet. There was scant room for pulling over, should the need arise to do repairs or take a piss. Hank was running through this area, he says, around 2 a.m. There was cloud cover, so it would have been pitch black had the snow not turned into greyish moonscape beyond the range of the headlights. The temperature on the dashboard read a bristling 7 degrees Fahrenheit. Ice crystals bordered the windows. At these temperatures, if you turned off your truck for too long, your diesel fuel would gel and you weren't going anywhere without an expensive thaw-out. Hank shivered as he recounted that night. I was running along at steady 62 miles per hour, which I reckon might have been a tad too fast for the conditions. Money will make you do some stupid things, Hank said. He'd been driving Mountain Dew and chain smoking to stay awake through the night, so it was no surprise to him when he had to answer the call of nature. He peeled over to the side of the road as far off the roadway as he could without getting stuck in the deep snow drifts, clambered over to the passenger side door and opened it to piss directly off the top step. When it's that cold out, you gotta hold on tight or your packer will go full turtle on you and you'll piss all over your britches, he said with a guffaw of laughter. Ain't no sense in getting all the way down if it's just a quick stop, as he told me the rest. It was without his trademark crook grin. Now, when I say it was cold out, I don't mean it was Arctic-like, but it was more damp than you'd expect at that temperature. I didn't hear a damn thing, no wind, nothing, aside from my piss hitting the snowbank. He lit another cigarette and inhaled deeply. It was damn eerie, and it weren't the cold giving me goose pimples. I shook the dew off the lily, zipped up, and I got the hell out of there. About a half an hour later, I'm back to routine and got nothing but the CB radio on, cause the FM and AM air worth the goddamn up there. That radio was quiet too, as I reckon weren't any other damn fool out running these parts this time of night. Hank shifted uncomfortably in his seat and drank something from his flask. I heard something about made me jump out my skin and shit myself to boot. Now, I'm used to hearing the occasional bang or rattle as you pick up road debris or some shiz like that. Part of my brain thought it must have been my wheels picking up a chunk of ice and it were bouncing around between the cab and the trailer. But then I heard it again, real distinct, like knock, 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 steady, and like someone was knocking on a door wanting in. Hank sat up at this point and his eyes were into me. You can bet your sweet ass there weren't no way in hell. I was gonna stop out in the middle of nowhere and see who the F is hanging outside my truck. Knocking nice as you like. No sir, I stepped on the gas. Devil be damned, and hightailed it. Hank was getting a bit agitated, so I handed him some of my moonshine, hoping it'd calm his nerves. Them knocks was coming pretty regularly over the next 3 hours as I shagged ass to Twin Halls. Louder and more insistent as we went. By the time I was 50 miles from town and finally picking up some CB chatter, there was knocking real loud. Hank banged his fist on the table to illustrate how loud. Knock, knock, knock. By this point, I'm not sure if I should be more pissed off or terrified. This mother effer is banging on my cab hard enough to dent it. So I got on the mic and asked if there was anybody around who could drive by my rig to see what the hell is going on, you know. If they could see anything on my catwalk. Everybody was either in a stop or headed out the area, the opposite side of town. I figure I'd just get to the nearest truck stop where there's opposite side of town lighting and folks around to look for myself. I slow for the stoplights cause I sure as hell went stopping for shit before I had some civilization around me. Hank took another cigarette and lit it before continuing. I finally came to a red light. There weren't no one round, so I slowed down and rolled through that some bitch. Got another knock for my efforts and I about squeezed the turd out because I think the mother effer was whispering at me. About 10 minutes later, I pulled into the truck stop all the way into the fuel area where there were bright lights. I jumped out of my cab with my .45 in hand and circled round to the catwalk, giving it a wide berth. There wasn't no hide, no hair of anything or anyone. I looked under the rig to make sure someone wasn't sneaking off. Nothing. I climbed over the catwalk after getting my flashlight to inspect the damage to the door of my cab. There weren't a scratch on my rig. I couldn't sleep for at least a day after that bullshit. Turned in the load and went back to the truck stop and had a few drinks. I was about to thank Hank for his story and go back to my own truck when he grabbed my wrist. That's not the end of it, son. I heard you tell that next spring, when the snow melted, they found a hitchhiker about 50 feet off the ground up on the US 287. No mention of his cause of death, though where they found him round about the area where I stopped for that piss. Nowadays, I piss in bottles and don't stop for shit like less I'm around other folks. Needless to say, I don't stop in the middle of nowhere for anything much either these days.
Well, guys, this is a 100% true story. I shiz you not. When I was younger, I would always pester my mother and father to take me to the McDonald's across town. It wasn't too expensive, and half the time I didn't really even order food. I went there for one sole reason, and that was the play place. I loved the play place. It made me feel like I was truly free to adventure on in my own little world. Now every time I got in there was almost always some other kids in there, be it a boy or a girl. I'd always say hi and ask them if they wanted to play hide and go seek. Usually they said yes because we were always eager to play with anyone. But one day, it seemed like there was a really big kid in the queue across from me. I mean, really big. I was going to go ask this big kid to come play with me, but he turned around and looked at me. He started slowly crawling towards me, very slowly like a snail. I was a bit scared. I tried to get out of the queue, but every time I went faster, he went faster. I was horrified. Then I heard sirens. My mother always told me that if I ever heard sirens that I should come to her. I sped up as fast as I can, and the man just stood there. I ran to my mother, who had a worried look on her face. In just a flash, I see a policeman burst through the McDonald's door and run to the playground. They took the big kid and put him in handcuffs, then drove him away the whole time. This kid was smiling at me. Just smiling. To this day, I occasionally see his smile every time I walk by McDonald's. McDonald's is going to fire me. I can't do this anymore. A minimum wage job isn't worth the nightmares I've been having. Rick, the manager of McDonald's I work at, told me tomorrow is my last chance to stop slacking off and clean the girls' restroom. But I'm not going to. I can't. Not after what I saw in there. The past 5 days I've been having one of my co-worker friends, Katie, clean the restroom for me. And just yesterday Rick caught on and has been giving me warnings. But I can't tell him the truth about what I saw in the mirror. Katie doesn't even know the whole story. If I told them, they'd probably call the men in white coats. Or even worse, my parents. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. No sleep. This is the only place I feel comfortable talking about what I saw. Maybe you can give me some advice about what to do. It started a week ago. I was on the evening shift. I had already cleaned the boys' restroom, and I knew there was a mess in the girls. So I grabbed the mop and bucket out of the supply closet and went in. There was some sort of spillage on the grey tiles under the far stall, so I wheeled my mop bucket over and started cleaning. Nothing out of the ordinary. It took me a while to notice what was up with the mirror. It was a wide, too-thick mirror, and someone had covered it with words that looked like they were written in lipstick. When I got closer, I realized that the words were a bunch of slogans from McDonald's. You deserve a break today. We love to see you smile. I'm loving it. And a bunch more I had never heard before. It took me a second to notice I was wrong. The words weren't written on the mirror. The mirror was reflecting them. Reflecting a restroom that had McDonald's slogans written in huge red letters on the walls. What the F? I looked from the empty pale white and grey walls of the restroom and back at the mirror, which showed the same walls covered in hand-painted slogans. Look for the golden arches. Nobody makes your day like McDonald's. Have you had your break today? Confused and terrified, I dashed into the hallway. Didn't go back for the mop and bucket, just got out of there as quick as I could. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. In fact, I barely spoke at all the rest of the night, except when someone asked why there was a mop in the restroom. I said it must have been left from the morning shift. That was only the first of my shifts that week. I worked full time. Thankfully, the next day someone else was on cleaning duty. Just to be safe, I made sure not to drink too many fluids, so I wouldn't have to go to the bathroom while I was there. I had a nightmare that night. I was in the restroom again, looking at the mirror, except I couldn't understand the words anymore. They weren't written in English. It was some sort of weird letters I had never seen before. I had a baseball bat in my hand, so I smashed the mirror over and over. As the glass fell in, a rain of shards, I realized that the mirror was actually a window. Then I heard whispering and what sounded like screaming children. Then I woke up. The next day I was on cleaning duty again. Somehow, I let myself be in denial. Now what I had seen last time was real. Maybe it was just a desperate desire to not be crazy, but I went into the girls' restroom again. I tried to look away and just clean the whole restroom without seeing the mirror, but I saw the words were there, out of the corners of my eyes as I was cleaning. Somehow I willed myself to ignore it. While I finished, I stepped up to the mirror again, pulled out my cell phone and turned the camera on. As I was trying to get an angle to show as much of the ketchup graffiti as I possibly could, I noticed there were two large red shoes under one of the stalls. I screamed, snapped the picture and ran. I refused to go back in. I don't care if I get fired for it. When I checked my phone later, I couldn't find the picture, but my ringtone was changed to this.
You deserve a break today. We're close by, right on your way at McDonald's.
The local McDonald's doesn't have Big Macs on the menu. Now I know why. For background, I've been working at my local McDonald's for a few months now, as my first job. So a few weeks ago we were told by our manager to take Big Macs off the menu and to tell customers they couldn't order it for a while. This confused us because we had just gotten our new stock of food and we had everything we needed to make them, but we listened to what we were told. A few of the co-workers and I didn't like the drop in sales and angry folk that would come in and harass us for something out of our control. So I and two others, let's call them Jim and Mike for privacy's sake, decide to find out what's going on, as our paychecks are being hurt severely by the lowering of sales. We spoke to our manager and they told us they didn't know any more than we did, and they were told to be like this by the higher ups. That was not good enough, so we contacted our owner and they said not to worry about it, and there was just a problem with the food we got and it would be fixed in a few weeks. A few weeks go by and nothing has changed. We call again and get a similar response. The food is bad, just wait a bit. We decide instead of waiting for things to be fixed, we will look into it ourselves. We looked into it and found our suppliers for our products and decided to investigate them a bit. Everything was as fine as we could tell until we got to our meat. We looked at the supplier, and unlike the others, we tried to find where they were based. We couldn't find anything. We tried looking them up, but no results were related to them. So we decided we would wait until the next shipment came in, and we'd follow the truck to see where it came from. The shipment comes in, and we are off that day, so we can follow it. We follow the truck back to a building out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by barbed wiring and a gate. With nothing better to do, we decide to sneak in. When we get close to it, we got hit with a foul odor coming from the inside, almost like something had been dead there for too long. While covering our noses, we went in. Immediately after entering, it was obvious where the smell was coming from. On the ground, there was what appeared to be several rotting animal carcasses scattered around the room. By that point, we were ready to leave when a ghoul falls on Jim. We look up, and above us is a large dripping creature with pitch black eyes and long claws in place of fingers. Not knowing what to do, we started to run and we thought we would get away when it catches up to us and sinks its claws into Jim, lifting him off his feet and throwing him back into the building. By that point, we had made it to Mike's car and had started getting away. We sped away from there as soon as we could, but on the way out, we came across more of those things which started chasing us. We thought they would catch us as they were gaining, but we got out of there before they could catch us. Later, we reported this to the police on the pretense our friend was lost and possibly injured in that general area, and we let them look into it. When they got there, it was empty. There were no carcasses and no creatures. Our boss gave us some time off after the incident, and when I came in to start work again, they were serving a full menu again. It turns out the day after that happened, they got an unexpected shipment of supplies that were used to make new Big Macs again. It's been a month since then, and we ran out again, and I don't know if I want them to get their next shipment. I think I'm going to quit, but no matter what, I don't think I'll be eating at McDonald's again. Why I stopped working at McDonald's. I can't believe it. A full 13 years of my life in a school system that has caused me nothing but stress and anxiety. 4 years of my life wasting my resources and money at community college, and all it's landed me is a shiz job at McDonald's. You know, there's something wrong with American education when you dedicate your entire youth to a system that you were forced into, and all it gets you is a minimum wage job at some fast food place. While I may be venting about my personal life, I am not writing this as a means of coping with my suppressed anger. There is something that has been slowly ruining my life to the point where I am even scared to leave my own house. To start, I've been working at this job for about 6 months now. I am a male in my mid-20s, and I've had a long history of meeting weirdos and creeps. But this one certainly takes the cake. Ever since I started working here, there was this guy, we'll call him Joe, fake name. He was a middle-aged man that had glasses and comb over with blindingly white skin. I would rarely see him talking. In fact, I don't think I had ever seen him converse with any of the work staff on a conversational level when I started working there. Now I know what you're thinking. Maybe this guy is an introvert. Or maybe he has some social disorders and he just prefers to stay quiet. But let me tell you, actions speak louder than words, my friends. And what this guy has done to me, to my colleagues, will haunt us for the rest of our lives. The only time I saw him express some real emotion was when he left his phone on the counter. I picked it up just to see what sort of background this guy had, seeing as he was so strange. He immediately came back and snatched it out of my hands. "Do not ever touch my phone," he screamed at me. That was the very first time I had ever heard him yell in all the time I had been working there. One day Joe came into work with an entirely different persona. He had been proposing we start doing all these new things with the McDonald's. All of them were either disturbing, creepy, or just flat out disgusting. One of his proposals was that he start dressing up like Ronald McDonald and having tickle fights with the kids. I don't know if I stated this already, but this guy is in his freaking 40s and is acting like it's completely normal. I passed it off as I thought he was just trying to make me laugh with some sort of awkward humor that only someone like him could muster. One of my other co-workers, Maya, had told me that he said that he thought it would be funny if he started hiding in people's cars and surprising them with free Happy Meals. Said that it would bring people back to McDonald's more often. In the coming weeks, he would start asking us about more personal questions like what we think the age of consent should be and what we think happens after we die. He told us that he believed that there are slaves in the afterlife and that people like Hitler will have the most slaves because he killed the most people. This guy was just getting creepier by the day. Last week we had found a hidden camera in the woman's restroom ventilation. We checked to see who put it in there, but we couldn't make out a face. And it definitely had to be one of the staff members because all we could see was a uniform. My manager immediately started accusing people of it. Mainly the guys, which was me, these two other guys, and Joe. Joe remained silent like he always did and just awkwardly looked around the place while talking. So my manager assumed it couldn't have been him. Finally, one day, Joe had said he was going outside to smoke and he had left his phone in the back of the McDonald's. Maya and I had been trying to guess the password and miraculously we opened it by being 4321. This guy was not very clever. As we scrolled through his camera roll, we had discovered a couple of pictures of kids on his phone. Maya had told me that she didn't know Joe had kids, but as we continued scrolled through his camera roll, we saw that there were provocative pictures of kids from all ages taken inside the McDonald's. We immediately showed our manager and we waited for him to come back inside. When he came back, my manager told him a new one and said that she would be contacting the police. He immediately glared at Maya and I and he muttered softly, "You went through my phone?" After that, he started walking towards us and we immediately got the F out of there and waited for the police. They arrested him and we haven't seen him since. Now this is where it gets bloody strange. A month had gone by and Maya and I had been getting close. We started going out And in some strange way, the incident had made us bond more and had led us to start seeing each other. Life seems to work in very odd ways. One night we went out and we went to the movies for a date. It wasn't until midway through the movie that someone with a comb-over haircut and glasses got up from his seat and exited the theatre. Maya had looked at me and asked if I had seen that guy. I nodded my head, and we both just spent the rest of the movie wondering if it had been Joe. As we were going back to my car, I looked inside my window to find that there was a Happy Meal just lying in my car seat. Now, the last thing I would ever bring on a date is a Happy Meal, and it had not been there before. But what freaked me out was whoever put it there must have gotten it no more than a half an hour prior, because it was too hot for it to have been sitting there for a substantial amount of time. We looked through it, and it was a standard Happy Meal, and nothing was out of the ordinary. I realized that if that was indeed Joe we saw in the theatre, that would mean he must have been watching us, and even knew which car was mine, and I had put it in there. I immediately threw it out, and we left to go back home. It was one Sunday afternoon when Maya texted me a very odd message that broke my heart. I'm sorry to tell you this, but we need to break up. I have been seeing another guy, and unfortunately we can't see each other anymore. Don't take this the wrong way. You're a very likable guy. I am asking you, please don't hate me with this. I hope in the end we can still be friends. I completely lost my shiz. What the F? What did I even do for this to happen to me? I called her and she didn't pick up. I Snapchatted her and she never opened it. I called her damn house phone and she didn't respond. This had to be a joke or a prank or something. Then I realized that every letter in that text that was capitalized spelled something. H, have, E, each, L, likable, P, please, M, me, E, end. Help me. I immediately took my car and drove over to her house as fast as I could. I rang her doorbell multiple times and no one answered. Her car was gone, and I went through her back door and no one was in the house. I called the police and there was a full investigation. She was gone. I couldn't believe it. I had told the police of everything that had happened and they are still looking for her. I have been crying every night since then. This was all my fault. Joe had taken her, all because I thought it would have been funny to go through his phone. The only good thing to happen to me in the last 10 years of my life was gone. It's been a month and I still haven't recovered. Maya has still not been found and I have become a raging alcoholic because of it. It wasn't until yesterday morning that I was taking the order through the drive-through speakers that someone on the other end just didn't talk. Hello, I had asked. Then the person on the other end started screaming. It wasn't until I kept listening that I realized it was Maya's voice. She was crying in agony. Please don't kill me, please. Then the screaming got more intense. I nearly vomited. Finally the screaming stopped and I realized it had to have been a video that the person was putting against the microphone. The final words the man spoke into the mic was, I told you not to go through my phone. Creepy cult people in a motorhome. Some years ago, me and my friends went for a drive into a disused quarry and now national park here in the UK. We spent a fair amount of time there throughout our teenage years. Being the teenagers we were, we would find ways of entertaining ourselves, sometimes at the expense of others. Nothing too sinister, but being your usual kids that had nothing more to do. One of our favorite pastimes would be to turn off our headlights and park up discreetly so no other cars could see us. A lot of people would park up there and smoke weed, out of sight of the police. We would hide the car in the dark, and once we saw someone pull up to have a quiet smoke, we pretended to be the police. I flash a blue light and play a siren as loud as possible on our sub. We found it funny, okay. Obviously this would result in the people in the car panicking and try to hide their weed or drive off as fast as possible. Funnily enough, we ended up making several friends from doing this once they realized it was a joke. Over the years, pretty much every night that we were up there, we would see a motorhome parked up in the same spot. We never paid them any mind because you could never see inside, and it always seemed dormant and dark. The motorhome was clearly a very dated model and pretty dirty. The only thing other than it looking slightly out of place was that it had the biggest antenna on the top. Like, I've never seen one so big. One night, it was extremely quiet up in the quarry, and we were about to go home because there wasn't really anything to do. Or should I say, no one to terrorize. One of our friends then asked why we hadn't given any grief to the people in the motorhome. We explained the above. It never seemed like there was anyone home. After some time, we decided that we'd bang on the doors and try to shake the vehicle and scream, "Earthquake!" again. Please bear in mind, we were very bored, stupid teenagers. All of us got out of the car as quietly as we could and sneaked all around the dirty motorhome. We counted to 3, trying to hide our giggles, and began our plan. We shook and banged and shouted "Earthquake" at the top of our lungs. After about 30 seconds, no response. We all looked at one another. There was clearly no one home, and it felt completely anticlimactic. We began to walk back to the car, which wasn't too much of a distance away, when the motorhome door opened at a pretty relaxed pace. We all heard the creak of the door and spun around to see what it was. We all stood, frozen at what we were seeing. People began to pile out of the motorhome, not quickly and not slowly, but like nothing had happened. That was strange enough, but the part that made our blood turn cold was the fact that they were all wearing masks. Black masks. They were covered in matching black cloaks, and there must have been around 8 to 9 of them. It's safe to say we booked it. We ran like we never ran before, straight back to the car and jumped in, starting up the engine and speeding off out of the quarry. 3 of us looked back to see if they were following, and they weren't. They were just standing there, looking in our direction. The door to the motorhome was still open, and we could see that it was lit by candlelight and candlelight alone. No wonder we could never see any light coming from the windows at night. Obviously, there could have been an explanation for this. Like maybe they were playing a trick on us because we used to play tricks on everyone else in the car park. But either way, it was terrifying. Creepy cult people, let's not meet again. Attempted brainwashing by a possible cult. A little background. I am 22. The people in this story are somewhere in their late 20s and early 30s, but they constantly change their ages, last names and jobs when I asked. My friend was 28. So this has mostly ended, but this was ongoing for about half a year due to a shitty life situation. I had a terrible breakup with the guy I had been living with, and I was really raw. So I moved out into an apartment with my friend, who was really cool about it, just never home. She always had guests though, and they were incredibly, deeply, terrible and weird. The first thing her boyfriend said to me after meeting him was that I should never trust anyone, especially him. Okay, weird. But then he started hitting on me, and my friend sort of watched in a weird way, as if she was jealous. But I kinda got this weird feeling she wasn't. He was really oddly charismatic, and he was the type to get away with saying anything. My friend was the quiet, confident type, and she'd flirt with me on occasion too. It was weird, but I figured they were poly or something. They came on strong, but I'm always the accepting type, so I didn't care. A little over a month in, I couldn't move out, and we really started to get into trouble. He started threatening me and literally following me everywhere, including the bathroom. I'm starting to really freak out, so my friend agrees to stay home. By then, she's home almost all of the time. My friend then kind of fake rants about him to me, and she invites a completely new friend I've never met to help us. They do this weird thing where they comfort me in front of him. He just sits in the corner as they hug me and tell me how awful he is and how great I am. I keep asking them to make him leave, and they keep giving me excuses that seem really off. I also didn't have a job, and I wasn't on the lease, yet the boyfriend and her friend were, but they didn't live there. Something I hated was that they were always charmingly dishonest. They seemed like they were rarely busy, and if I asked for personal details, they kept changing the story. Her boyfriend said he was a doctor, a judge, a cop, an actor, and a lawyer at some point. My friend's friend seemed more like his friend, and they'd always be his co-worker, assistant, or occasionally boss when they changed the story. My friend had rich family to rely on, so I'm pretty sure she quit her regular job. But she's often make up a story about their jobs too. When they leave, they never say where, and they always keep their phones hidden. By 3 months, the boyfriend and her friend are there every day. My friend is there sometimes, but she just makes it seem like I've offended her badly. I'm still unable to find work then, so I feel like pretty bad. Still, her boyfriend and her friend were constantly asking me questions, having me explain everything, and being oddly rude, but in very sweet ways. I'm sorry to say, I fell for a lot of it. They even decided to give me 2 nicknames, Beautiful and Gullible. They tell really weird, pointless lies. They were with me 24/7, all day, every day. If I looked at my phone, they did too. If I went to the shower, they kept opening the door. No locks. I really don't know why. Both of them, they're still really nice and telling me how great I am. And they all even tell me they love me at some point. They started saying that they were all angels. Everyone tried to be romantic with me, and everyone started to feel kind, yet like authority figures. They're all really great talkers, not to mention older than me. 4 months in, I've gotten used to the lack of privacy and boundaries. I keep saying it's temporary. My friend and her friends kept switching from nice to really terrible. At this point, they literally are sleeping in the same room as me. I wake up to them having sex occasionally. They even start waking me up randomly multiple times a night to do random tasks. My friend's boyfriend starts talking about how they're not really together anymore, and about how I'm so great for him, and blah blah blah. It's not long before he's telling me how I'm the one and everything. And unfortunately, he's really easy to fall for. He was the only one I was ever alone with the whole time. I wasn't ever even alone with my friend. Even worse, I'm really strangely good at meshing with other people. So I really fit everyone really nicely. And when her boyfriend was great, he was really great and would align really nicely. Because of this, I think he started to really believe his BS. 5 months in, all hell breaks loose. They stopped calling me by my name entirely and only called me gullible. Her boyfriend became really erratic after the first time I rejected him. They started creating planned drama to ambush me with. I'd even overhear them coming up with literal plans for the next day if I pretended to sleep. They were all really good at talking in weird loops and weird phrases. A few of them were demons. You're a demon. We're demons. We're terrible people. Be gullible. We are beautiful. And I have trust issues. They'd ask me constantly weird questions like, who are you? And are you keeping secrets? Over and over until I'd answer. They started recording me and trying to get me to embarrass myself in any way. They wouldn't let me leave, and I was exhausted all the time. They tried to convince me I was jealous of everything and that I was a homewrecker. I was someone else entirely, that I hated all minorities of any kind, that I was a prostitute, and that I was even secretly a pedophile. The accusations and explanations were constant. They'd corner me into everything and openly take note of my reaction to absolutely everything. I started trying to escape, but they kept telling me they had information that is sent to everyone. I started getting the feeling everyone had heavy blackmail on each other. 6 months in, they threatened me. They called a friend over to scare me. He pretended to be a sex trafficker. I really started to freak out and I threatened to call the police. Everyone really started to change then. I had no energy. They started recording me, followed me to the shower, trying to seduce me constantly, making me afraid to eat, trying to convince me they had someone impersonate B to doctor evidence about me, and threatened me if I told anyone anything. Their random drama got incredibly elaborate. They'd invite friends over to trick me and humiliate me over anything. I'd even never know anybody's name. Strangers would watch me sleep. They'd attempt to convince me of absolutely anything, and they'd coordinate attacks to get a specific reaction. There were at least 8 people involved. A few times they figured how to get me to go into fits of rage, where I threatened them and have a full freakout. They recorded them and kept asking if I wished for retribution. If I hurt or embarrassed them in any way, they'd say that must be their atonement. They'd repeat my secrets back to me, and by then I'd given into a few regrettable demands, and they'd remind me of them. They kept suggesting that they created me in some way, and that I was in their dream, or I was a character in their plot. When I'd reach my breaking point, they'd get terrifyingly sweet. They'd pretend that they were helping me get repressed emotions out, or giving me some sort of therapy. I even believed it out of exhaustion. Her boyfriend, who seemed to be the leader most of the time, started telling me I was finally becoming beautiful, but the second I rejected his advances, the abuse started full force. They kept asking if I wanted retribution. It was like they had unlimited time and energy, and I was always exhausted and in pain. I started to notice that their weird code words were actually working. I'd get an emotion or desire from them that I think was just too much. One night I just snapped and couldn't think. I just couldn't care. Nothing mattered, and I just walked out with less than shoes. I walked shoeless to my ex's parents' house, and he thankfully came to pick me up that night. So for the time being, I live with my ex again. It's been less than a month, and oddly, I just can't stop laughing about the whole thing. It really isn't funny to me, but I can't have a normal reaction to it. There's a lot I left out, so it's probably a bit rush sounding. I don't really know what to do, lol. 8 months with 3 deeply cruel individuals. They attempted to brainwash me, create multiple personalities, and refused to let me leave. The cult at Target. This incident just occurred a few hours ago, and it's still making my head spin. Forgive me if it seems lengthy, but an awful lot was said. My mother's sister and I were shopping in a local Target. As we strolled around, I recognized a girl named Stacy that I used to go to school with. For reference, I dropped out of high school my senior year, so I haven't been in my old high school or seen anyone from there for about a year now. I simply glance at her and keep on moving, doubting that she recognized me, because I haven't been in school for a year. A few minutes later, I'm on the complete opposite side of the store when I see this girl again. Like last time, our eyes awkwardly meet, and I try to just walk past her, but this time she actually said something. Hey, didn't we play tennis together? Stacy spoke with wide eyes and a painfully large smile. There was a girl standing next to her, but I didn't recognize her. I simply replied a yes in response. I was never friends with her in school. In fact, I never talked to her or even liked her. That's when she introduced herself, as if I completely forgot who she was. She goes on to question if I still went to high school, in which I explained that I graduated early with online classes. The conversation started out normal. I thought it was simply us catching up due to the fact that I had been absent from school. I kept wanting to cut the conversation short, but Stacy kept prodding about what was I doing now. Am I in college? And what was college like? Harmless questions, in fact. I didn't mind answering her questions. Then the conversation took an unexpected twist. Stacy somehow weaseled the conversation into one about God and Christianity. For reference, I do consider myself a Christian, but not one of those hardcore ones who are constantly spewing Bible quotes at strangers. She asks if I attended church, to which I responded with yes. Her eyes became even wider and her smile even bigger. Her old mantra of God sounded like this. Back in my high school days, I was always partying and being so happy. But that was all fake, and no one knew that I was actually pretty sad. That's when I found this church and showed me God's way and His undying love. He accepted me and He'll accept you too. Now I am always happy, for I have God on my side. And at this church, God truly appears before your very eyes. He cured me of all my physical and mental ailments, like when I messed up my knee in tennis. The whole time Stacy spoke, there was just a robotic tone about it, as if these words were memorized, practiced, and rehearsed. There was almost no genuine emotion in her, just wide eyes and a never-failing smile. Then her friend Ashley began her speech. Keep in mind, my mother and sister are just an aisle away, waiting on me. Ashley's speech went like this. For a while in life, I suffered with depression and suicide. I was always faking to be happy until I found this church. This church truly opened my eyes, and heart. I no longer feel dead inside. This is when she hinted that maybe I feel dead inside too, and the only way to recover from it is to look to God. Ashley also used the word zombie to describe this dead feeling, and that's when I began to really think that there's something wrong with these girls. Ashley continued on saying, I don't think it is a mere coincidence that we ran into you. God led me to you. He wanted me to reveal to you the way. God put a vision in my mind of you opening a present, and that present is our Lord and Savior. She kept on ranting how this is destiny that we met, and that God put Stacy and Ashley in my path to reveal himself to me. When Ashley mentioned depression and suicide, I could not help but to believe her for a slight second. I had been struggling with depression for years, but kept it quiet. And with me being a believer of God, I was almost fooled into thinking about this is a sign from God telling me to finally open up and get help. But when Ashley began to ramble about her church, that foolish hope I had dissipated quickly. Then the two moved the conversation onto their church. They kept stating that it was not a noble church and that God himself in flesh and blood came to them at the church. They informed me that God came to them to heal them of misery and grief. Ashley then pulled out a business card which had the church's email, a Bible quote, and her personal phone number. Before the anticipated departure, they kept saying how cool I am and that they are glad that they met me. Then we finally parted ways. I remember my legs being extremely weak when I walked away. That's when in mind it clicked. Are they a part of some cult? Their mannerism and behavior seemed too scripted to be real. That's when my sister found me and answered my suspicions. Apparently, before I had to endure that 10-minute chat with Stacy and Ashley, my sister overheard the girls were having the same conversation with another girl on the opposite side of the store. So this was all scripted, and it was their way of luring and persuading strangers to join their church. I realize now how they do it too, to reel me in to their discussion. They discussed about my absence from school and experience in college, to reel in the other girl they talked with. They started by complimenting her outfit and inquiring about her artistic hobbies. I wonder how many people they ended up talking to, and if they were just walking around the store hoping to find easy targets to talk to. I have so many questions, and that's what bothers me the most about this. And being the somewhat religious person that I am, their talk of God unnerved me. It is sort of humorous to think of now, simply because I think crazy God lovers are comical, and I'm still bewildered. If you have any information about how cults operate and how they coax people into joining them, please let me know. Does this incident sound like cult members trying to spread their message, or harmless teenage girls simply spreading the love of God? If you have any other questions about what occurred in my interaction with them, please ask. Also, it's possible that I will see Stacy again because she is attending my college next semester. Although Stacy and Ashley seemed harmless and just overly excited about God, I honestly hope we never meet again.